Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. The night felt wrong before I even left my live place, like the air had weight to it. I stood in my kitchen staring at the sink longer than I needed to, telling myself to stop being dramatic. Dinner was just dinner. People said weird things sometimes. Not everything was a warning. Still, my chest felt tight in that quiet way that doesn't ask permission. Tom picked a restaurant that tried to look expensive without actually being expensive. Dark walls, narrow tables, candles stuck in thick glass holders that trapped heat. The menu was short and confident, like it didn't care if you liked it. Everything smelled like oil and herbs and something metallic underneath. The place was half full, but it felt crowded anyway. He was already seated when I arrived, back straight, hands folded, eyes up. He smiled like he had been waiting exactly the right amount of time. Not eager, not bored, precise. We sat down and ordered. The opening minutes were smooth, too smooth. He asked about my day, my work, the area I lived in. He listened closely, nodding, storing things away. I noticed he rarely talked about himself unless it connected back to something I had said. It felt like he was building a map. The hook didn't come fast. It waited until the plates were on the table and I had taken a few bites, until my shoulders relaxed a little, until I forgot to be careful. He said he only dated people he could influence. He didn't pause after saying it, didn't soften it, didn't check my reaction. He said it like he was explaining a preference, like liking certain foods more than others. I felt my stomach drop so suddenly I almost laughed. He continued calm and steady. He said influence was misunderstood. He said it was about force. He said it was about alignment. He said relationships work best when one person helps shape the other toward better outcomes. Better by whose standards? I stared at my plate, the food suddenly unappealing. The candle flickered and threw shadows across his face that made his smile look sharper than it should have. He said he had tried dating equals before. He said it led to friction. He said too many opinions slowed things down. He said influence created efficiency. That word again, efficiency. I felt targeted in a way that was hard to explain. Not attacked, chosen. I asked what he meant by influence. He said habits, decisions, priorities. He said subtle things mattered more than big ones. He said over time people adapted naturally. Adapted. The restaurant noise faded into a dull hum. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. I realized I was sitting very still, like movement might confirm something. He said he looked for people who were open, reflective, willing to consider other perspectives. He said resistance early on was usually a sign of rigidity. Rigidity felt like a word he had ready. I tried to respond carefully, saying I valued independence and mutual respect. He nodded slowly and said independence often softened with trust. He said most people didn't realize how much guidance they wanted until they had it. Guidance from him. I felt my chest tighten. The pieces started lining up too cleanly. The questions earlier. The way he steered topics. The way he mirrored my language slightly, then adjusted it. He smiled then and said the night was confirming his instincts. That was the moment I felt myself turn into evidence. Not a person having dinner. A case study unfolding in real time. He didn't mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. His tone stayed pleasant, almost appreciative, like he was pleased with the data coming in. He said first dates revealed more than people realized. He said most people showed how influenceable they were within the first hour. He said reactions mattered more than words. I thought about every time I had nodded just to keep things smooth. Every time I had softened a response. I felt exposed, like those moments had been logged. He said he liked how thoughtful I was. He said thoughtfulness often paired well with adaptability. He said adaptability was underrated. I pushed food around my plate without eating it. My appetite was gone. The table felt too small. The candle too close. I wanted space. He talked about past relationships again, but this time differently. He described how people had changed over time. How they dressed differently, spoke differently, chose different goals. He framed it like success stories. I noticed he never said they were happier. He asked how I handled advice. I said I listened but trusted my own judgment. He smiled and said trust could be built. Built by who? I realized then that nothing I said would shift the dynamic. Pushing back would just become resistance. Agreeing would become confirmation. Silence would be noted. I felt measured in a way that made my skin crawl. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, and said he appreciated how calm I was being. He said some people reacted emotionally. He said I seemed composed. Composed felt like another check mark. The candle burned lower, wax pooling onto the table. I stared at it, grounding myself in something simple, solid, not interpretive. He said something then that made everything click into focus. He said influence didn't mean control if the other person benefited too. He said growth didn't have to be equal to be fair. That sentence landed heavy. I imagined a future where every compromise was framed as growth, every doubt reframed as progress, every objection softened until it fit his idea of alignment. I felt something inside me harden quietly. I told him I was comfortable with what he was describing. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I told him I didn't want to be influenced. I wanted partnership. He nodded slowly, thoughtful. He said discomfort was normal when people confronted patterns. He said awareness came first. There it was again, like he was already diagnosing me. He smiled and said the night confirmed his instincts. I didn't ask which instincts. I already knew. I left before becoming evidence. I didn't stand up dramatically. I didn't raise my voice. I just pushed my chair back and stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. A few heads turned. I didn't care. He looked surprised, then curious. He asked if something was wrong. I told him I didn't want to continue. I told him this wasn't what I came for. I grabbed my bag and stepped away from the table. He said I was reacting strongly. He said influence didn't mean loss of self. He said walking away was also informative. Informative for who? I didn't respond. I walked toward the door, my legs shaky but moving. The restaurant felt darker on the way out, like the walls were closing in. Outside, the night air hit my face and I breathed deeply. My chest expanded like I had been holding my breath for too long. The street noise felt loud and messy and real. I stood there for a minute just breathing, letting my hands stop shaking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. On the walk home, my thoughts replayed the conversation in fragments. The smile, the word influence. The way he said confirmed like it was a victory. I felt a mix of relief and anger, mostly relief that I had left when I did. When I got back to my live place, I locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The quiet wrapped around me. No assessments. No instincts being confirmed. Later that night, I thought about how easy it is to mistake confidence for clarity. How some people talk about shaping others like it's generosity. How quickly you can stop being a person and start being proof. He messaged me once, saying he respected my honesty and that my reaction aligned with what he expected. That line made my stomach twist harder than anything else. I blocked the number and deleted the thread. Not because I was offended. Because I refused to be someone else's evidence. I want to be chosen for who I am, not for how easily I can be shaped. I should have trusted the feeling I got while tying my shoes, that quiet drive like my body was stalling for time. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was more like my brain was already tired. I remember standing there thinking how weird it was to feel worn out before anything even started. I shook it off and left anyway because that's what I usually do. Amanda picked a small late-night bakery cafe that stayed open after dinner hours for people who didn't want to go home yet. It smelled like sugar and burnt espresso. The lights were low and yellow, making everything feel soft even when it was. There were only a few tables, all too close together, like the room wanted everyone to hear everyone else. She was already there, sitting sideways in her chair, foot hooked around the leg of the table like she owned it. She smiled when she saw me and waved, relaxed, confident. I remember thinking she looked comfortable in her skin in a way that made me relax too. That did last. We ordered drinks and talked about easy stuff at first. Music, random complaints. The bakery playlist that always sounded the same. She laughed easily. Nothing felt tense. I let my shoulders drop without realizing they had been tight. The hook didn't come as a warning. It came disguised as nothing. She asked if we could switch seats because the light was bothering her. I didn't mind, so I moved. It felt normal. Considerate. A few minutes later, she asked if I could scoot my chair closer because she couldn't hear me well. I hesitated just a second, then did it. The table felt smaller after that, but I told myself I was overthinking. Then she reached for my drink and took a sip. Not asking, not pausing, just did it. I blinked, surprised, then laughed awkwardly and said I would rather she asked next time. My voice stayed light. I didn't want to make it weird. She smiled and nodded like she had heard something important. I didn't know why that smile bothered me until later. The night kept moving, but little things started stacking up. She asked personal questions fast, then pushed when I answered vaguely. She leaned closer than necessary when she talked. She interrupted me mid-sentence a few times and didn't apologize. Each time, I adjusted. I told myself it was a big deal. I told myself first dates were awkward. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Then she said it. She admitted she tested men by denying small boundaries. She said it casually, like it was a fun personality quirk. She said it helped her see how people reacted under pressure. She said big boundaries didn't show much because everyone respected those early. She said the small ones told the truth. My stomach dropped. She didn't sound proud or guilty, just curious, like a scientist describing a method. She said she noted reactions quietly. Quietly. That word made my chest tighten. I realized then that every small moment before that had been deliberate. The seat, the space, the drink. None of it was random. It was a sequence. I felt measured. Not judged, not evaluated. Measured, like she was seeing how much I bet before I snapped or vanished. I asked what kind of reactions she looked for. She said compliance without resentment was ideal. She said anger was a red flag. She said assertiveness was tricky. She said tone mattered more than words. Tone. I suddenly became aware of my own voice. How careful it sounded. How often I softened statements automatically. I hated that I noticed it. She said people who got upset over small things often had control issues. She said people who let everything slide lacked self-respect. She said balance was rare. I wondered where that left me. The caffeine noise felt louder now. A spoon clinked against a cup at the next table, and it made me flinch. I hated that too. She leaned back in her chair and watched me like she was waiting for something. I didn't know what. She asked if I minded if she checked my phone photos. She said she liked seeing how people documented their lives. I said no, not firmly, just no. She smiled again, the same smile as before, and said fair enough. Then she reached toward my phone anyway, stopping just short of touching it. My heart jumped. I pulled it back instinctively. She nodded slowly and leaned away satisfied. I realized then that I had passed or failed something and I didn't know which. I told her I didn't like feeling tested. My voice stayed calm, but my chest was pounding. I told her it made me uncomfortable. She nodded and said discomfort was part of dating. She said boundaries only mattered if they were challenged. She said reactions were information. Information for who? She said she wrote things down later mentally. She said she could remember patterns easily. She said it helped her decide who was safe. Safe for what? I felt smaller by the minute, like the space I was allowed to take up kept shrinking. I sat straighter without meaning to. I chose words more carefully. I hated how fast my body adapted. She asked if I wanted to share a pastry. I said no thanks, I wasn't hungry. She ordered one anyway and slid it toward me, pushing it just into my space. She said just try a bite. I didn't. I pushed it back gently and said I really didn't want it. She watched my face closely, eyes scanning, then nodded again. I felt like I was in a maze where every turn was being mapped. She said she had learned the hard way that people lied about respecting boundaries. She said testing early saved pain later. She said good men didn't mind being tested. That sentence sat heavy in my gut. I wondered what it meant if I minded. I started replaying everything I had already adjusted. The chair, the space, the tone. I realized how much ground I had given without noticing. I asked if she ever asked consent before testing. She tilted her head and said asking defeated the purpose. That was when the room felt too small. The lights seemed harsher. The sugar smell felt cloying. I wanted air. I told her I didn't like the method. I told her I was interested in being tested. I told her I came to meet someone, not to prove something. She listened calmly, nodding, like she was still collecting data. She said my reaction was interesting. She said some men got defensive faster. I didn't know what to say to that. Anything I said would just become another note. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. A couple of people glanced over. I didn't care. She looked up at me, surprised but composed. She asked if I was leaving already. I said yes. She said walking away was also a reaction. She said it showed firmness. That almost stopped me. Almost. I realized then how easy it would be to stay just to avoid being categorized. How tempting it was to keep playing to see where I landed. That scared me. I told her I didn't want to be measured like that. I told her my boundaries weren't practice tools. I grabbed my jacket and stepped away from the table. She thanked me for my honesty. That thank you felt like another test. I walked out into the night air and felt my lungs fill fully for the first time since sitting down. The street was quiet, damp from earlier rain. Everything felt solid again. I stood there for a minute, breathing, letting my hands stop shaking. My phone buzzed once. I didn't check it. On the way home, my thoughts looped around the same moments. The smile, the reach, the quiet notes. I felt a mix of relief and anger, mostly at myself for not noticing sooner. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt steady. Predictable. I stayed there longer than usual, just letting the tension drain out of my shoulders. Later that night, I caught myself second-guessing small things. Should I have spoken up sooner? Should I have laughed less? Should I have been firmer? I stopped myself. Those thoughts felt like her tests lingering. She messaged me once, saying she appreciated how I handled myself and that my reaction showed promise. That sentence made my skin crawl. I blocked the number and put my phone away. Not because I don't believe in boundaries, but because I don't believe in people who deny them on purpose just to see what happens. I want someone who listens when I say no the first time. I noticed the window first, not him. It was one of those wide restaurant windows that acts like a mirror at night, showing yourself sitting there before you even walk in. I caught a reflection and felt that weird pause where you check if you look like someone who belongs inside the plan you are about to step into. I almost adjusted my jacket, then stopped. Something about that moment felt like a warning I couldn't name yet. Stephen picked a downtown tapas place that doubled as a wine bar, narrow and loud, all brick walls and hanging plants. The tables were close enough that you could hear everyone else's laughter bleed into yours. It felt social by design, like privacy wasn't really an option even if you wanted it. He was already there, seated near the center, not tucked away. He smiled big when he saw me and waved like we were old friends. I remember thinking he looked too relaxed for a first date, like nothing here mattered to him in the same way it mattered to me. We ordered drinks and leaned in over the table to hear each other. Everything felt normal for about 10 minutes. Small talk. Jokes about the music being too loud. Comments about how crowded it was. He laughed easily. I relaxed a little. Then he waved. Not at me. He lifted his hand casually and waved past my shoulder toward the bar area. I turned before I meant to, following the motion like a reflex. That's when I saw them. Two people at the bar pretending very badly to not be watching us. One leaned forward too quickly, then looked down at their phone. The other smiled and raised their glass slightly before catching themselves. I turned back confused, expecting an explanation that would make this normal. He smiled like he had just remembered to mention something minor. He said his friends like to come along sometimes. He said it helped them give feedback later. He said they weren't judging, just observing. Observing. My stomach dropped. He said it casually, like he was talking about splitting an appetizer. He didn't ask if I was okay with it. He didn't frame it like something he was embarrassed about. He said it like a feature. He told me he sometimes invited friends to observe dates from nearby. He said it helped him notice things he might miss. He said they were good at reading body language. He said it was nice to have outside perspective. Then he waved again. This time they waved back without hesitation. I felt like a display. The restaurant suddenly felt brighter, louder. Every laugh at another table felt aimed at me. I could feel my posture change, my shoulders pulling in slightly. I hated that I noticed myself doing it. I asked how often he did this. He said usually first dates. He said early impressions mattered most. He said it saved time. Saved time for who? He said they wouldn't interrupt. He said they were just there to watch how things flowed. He said I should pretend they weren't there. Pretend. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out wrong. Thin. Forced. I glanced toward the bar again without wanting to. They were watching. Not constantly, but enough, like they knew when to look. Every movement I made suddenly felt too loud. The way I picked up my glass, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear. I imagined it all being discussed later, replayed from different angles. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. He said people acted differently when they knew they were being watched. He said that contrast was interesting. Interesting. I felt heat rise in my face. Not anger. Embarrassment. Like I had been caught in something intimate without agreeing to it. He asked me a question about my job. I answered, then stopped mid-sentence when I realized one of his friends was leaning closer, clearly listening. I felt my words dry up. I finished quickly just to be done. He noticed and said I seemed a little tense. He said that was normal at first. He said people relaxed after a while. After a while of what? Being watched. I wondered how many other people had sat in that chair, unaware at first, then slowly realizing. I wondered if anyone had ever stayed long enough to forget the eyes on them. The server came by and asked if everything was okay. I nodded automatically. Stephen smiled and said yes. I felt ridiculous for not saying something right then, for not standing up and leaving. But part of me was frozen. Part of me didn't want to make a scene. That part annoyed me later. He explained that his friends helped him debrief afterward. He said they noticed patterns. He said they caught red flags he might miss. He said dating was easier with a team. Team. I was not it. I asked what they were watching for specifically. He shrugged and said vibes, reactions, authenticity. He said they could tell when someone was nervous or guarded. I thought about how guarded I felt right then and wondered how that would be framed later. Suspicious. Closed off. Not a good sport. I tried to shift my seat slightly, angling my body away from the bar. It didn't help. I could still feel them. Peripheral vision picks up more than you want it to. He talked about a past date where his friends had warned him early. He said it saved him from wasting time. He laughed like it was a funny story. I did laugh. My drink sat untouched. My hands felt clammy around the glass. I kept glancing at the exit, calculating how obvious it would be if I left now. He noticed my eyes moving and followed my gaze. He smiled and said they were just grabbing another round. He waved again. They waved back. I wanted the floor to open up. I asked if he ever told people beforehand. He said no. He said it changed behavior too much. He said people performed if they knew. He said this way was more real. Real for who? I realized then that my consent had never been part of the plan. Not before. Not during. Maybe not even after. This was already happening. I was already part of it. The restaurant noise felt overwhelming. Every sound stacked on top of the next. Laughter. Clinking glasses. The music pounding low and steady. I felt like I was on a stage with no spotlight, just eyes. He asked me what I thought about all this. Not apologetically. Curiously, like he was gathering another data point. I told him I did like it. My voice shook slightly. I hated that. I told him it made me uncomfortable. I told him I felt exposed. He nodded thoughtfully and said that reaction made sense. He said discomfort often showed up when people were challenged. He said growth didn't happen in comfort zones. That phrase again, like discomfort was a gift. I looked at the bar and saw one of his friends typing on their phone, glancing up occasionally. I imagined messages flying back and forth. Commentary. Ratings. Jokes. Something inside me snapped quietly. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the noise like a crack. A few heads turned. I didn't care. Stephen looked surprised, genuinely this time. He asked what was wrong. I told him I was okay being watched. I told him I didn't agree to this. I told him I was leaving. He said I was overreacting. He said his friends were harmless. He said it wasn't like they were right next to us. I gestured toward the bar. He followed my gaze and shrugged. He said they were just there. Just there. I grabbed my bag and stepped away from the table. My legs felt shaky but strong enough. I didn't look at his friends again. I didn't want to give them one last look to analyze. I walked out of the restaurant into the night air and felt my chest expand like I had been underwater. The street was loud and messy and full of strangers who didn't know me. It felt safe. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, letting my hands stop shaking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check. On the walk home, I replayed the night in fragments, The wave, the smiles, the casual way he said observe, the ease with which he put me on display. When I got back to my live place, I locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. A quiet wrapped around me. No eyes. No waves. No notes being taken. Later that night, I thought about how trust gets broken before it even forms sometimes. How some people treat dating like a group project where the other person doesn't know the rubric. He messaged me once, saying he thought I handled myself well and that his friends liked my energy. That sentence made my stomach twist harder than anything else. I blocked the number and deleted the thread. Not because he had friends. Because he turned me into a display without asking. I still go out to dinner. I still meet new people. But now I notice the bar area first. I notice where eyes linger. I notice who waves when they think I'm not looking. I don't want to be observed. I want to be met. The feeling showed up in the mirror before I left. That tiny pause where you look at yourself and feel like something is about to be tested. I wasn't nervous in a cute way. It was more like my stomach went quiet, like it was waiting. I shook it off because I didn't want to cancel again for no clear reason. I told myself dinner was just dinner. Food, talking, nothing heavy. Mark picked a small neighborhood restaurant that tried really hard to feel intimate. Low ceilings, dark wood, candles everywhere even though it was early. The kind of place where voices drop automatically. It smelled like garlic and something sweet burning. The tables were close enough that you could hear other people's dates without trying. He was already there, sitting with his hands folded, posture straight, eyes scanning the room like he was checking exits. He smiled when he saw me, warm but measured. Not nervous. Not excited, steady. I didn't know yet how much that steadiness would bother me later. We ordered and started with easy stuff. Jobs, food preferences, how annoying traffic was getting lately. He listened closely, nodding at the right moments. Nothing felt off yet, just a little formal. I figured he was shy or careful. The hook did slam into me. It crept. He started asking questions that sounded thoughtful at first, about how I handled uncertainty, how confident I felt making big decisions, whether I ever doubted myself even after choosing something. I answered honestly because that felt like the right thing to do. I said I overthought sometimes. I said I questioned myself more than I should. I said I was working on trusting my instincts. He smiled wider at that. Not encouraging, satisfied. That's when he said it. He said he preferred partners who doubted themselves. He didn't whisper it. He didn't soften it. He said it plainly, like he was stating a food allergy. He said it made relationships smoother. He said people who questioned themselves were more adaptable. He called it compatibility. My fork stopped halfway in my mouth. He kept talking, like he didn't notice. He said confidence could turn into rigidity. He said doubt kept people open. He said he liked being with someone who checked themselves often. I felt targeted instantly. Not insulted, selected. The candle between us flickered and threw shadows up his face. His eyes stayed on mine, calm, curious, like he was watching how the words landed. I could feel heat creeping up my neck. I didn't know yet if it was anger or something worse. I asked what he meant by doubt. He said self-awareness, humility. He said people who were too sure of themselves didn't grow. He said doubt created space for guidance. Guidance from who, I wondered, him. The restaurant noise faded into the background. Forks clinked. Someone laughed too loudly at the next table. All of it felt far away. I was suddenly very aware of how I was sitting, how I was holding my shoulders, how my voice might sound when I responded. I hated that awareness. He asked if I saw doubt as a weakness. I said no, but I didn't think it should be a requirement either. My voice came out careful, like I was walking on thin ice. He nodded slowly and said that response showed reflection. He said reflection was attractive. He said certainty often hid insecurity. That felt like a trap sentence. Anything I said could be folded back into his point. The food arrived, steaming plates set down between us. The smell should have been comforting. It wasn't. My appetite disappeared. I pushed food around instead of eating it. He talked about past relationships in broad strokes. Not stories. Patterns. He said some people resisted his perspective. He said those people didn't last. He said the best relationships were the ones where he didn't have to push. Push what, exactly? He asked how I responded to criticism. Not feedback. Criticism. I said it depended on how it was delivered. He smiled and said people who were confident usually answered that way. I felt like I was being nudged into a shape without realizing it. He said he liked being with someone who checked in before pushing back. He said it reduced conflict. He said harmony mattered more than ego. I thought about all the times I had swallowed words just to keep peace. All the times I had rewritten my own reactions to sound calmer. The realization made my chest feel tight. I asked him what he needed from a partner. He said trust, flexibility, openness to being wrong. He didn't mention support. He didn't mention care. He didn't mention laughter. He noticed my silence and said quiet thinking was good. He said most people rush to defend themselves. He said I wasn't doing that. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. The candle burned lower. Wax pulled onto the table. I stared at it just to give my eyes somewhere else to go. He said something then that made everything snap into focus. He said doubt made people easier to align with. He said it created balance. Balance between who and who. I realized then that he wasn't describing partnership. He was describing control without force. A dynamic where one person stayed steady and the other stayed unsure. My hands curled into my napkin. I forced them to relax. I told him I was working toward more confidence, not less. I said I liked feeling grounded in my decisions. I said I didn't want to second-guess myself all the time. He tilted his head and said growth sometimes looked like discomfort. He said letting go of certainty could feel scary at first. That word first echoed in my head. First what? First step, first concession. I felt something and he pulled back sharply. Not fear, clarity. I asked if he ever doubted himself. He paused, just for a second. Then he said he trusted his judgment. He said it came from knowing who he was. That imbalance sat heavy between us. The way he said it made it clear. Doubt was for the other person, not for him. I felt small in a way that surprised me. Not because I believed him, but because I recognized the pattern, the slow reframing. The way my honesty had been turned into a preference. The way vulnerability had been marked as compatibility. The rest of the dinner felt unreal. He kept talking, but I stopped absorbing the words. I watched his mouth move. I nodded when it seemed expected. My mind replayed the sentence over and over. He prefers partners who doubt themselves. I imagined what that would look like long-term, questioning my reactions, checking with him before trusting myself, apologizing more than necessary, shrinking just enough to fit. The thought made my stomach twist. When the check came, he reached for it confidently. He said he liked to take care of logistics. He said it reduced friction. I didn't argue. Arguing felt pointless. We stood up and walked toward the door together. The restaurant felt darker on the way out, like the corners were closing in. The night air outside hit my face and I breathed deeper immediately. He asked if I wanted to do this again. His tone was calm, assured, but the answer was already leaning one way. I said I didn't think we were compatible. The word compatible tasted different coming from me. He looked surprised for the first time all night, not upset. Curious, he asked why. I told him I didn't want to be chosen for my self-doubt. I told him I was trying to grow out of that, not build a relationship around it. He smiled gently and said confidence was attractive too once it settled. Settled into what? I didn't respond. I just nodded and stepped back. We parted without drama. He walked away like it was just data that didn't line up. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the night noise wash over me. Cars. Voices. A siren far away. It all felt loud and grounding. On the way home, my thoughts bounced between anger and relief. Anger that he had said it so casually. Relief that he had said it at all. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt solid and neutral. I leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling, letting the tension drain out slowly. Later that night, I noticed how often I apologized in my own head, how quickly I questioned whether I had been too harsh, too sensitive. That scared me more than the date itself. He texted me once, saying he enjoyed meeting me and thought I had potential if I was open to growth. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and set my phone down. Not because I did doubt myself sometimes, but because I don't want to be loved for it. I wanted to be with someone who doesn't scan for my cracks and call it compatibility. I felt it before she said it. Like the night had a trapdoor I couldn't see yet. The air was warm and slow, the kind that makes you think nothing sharp is coming. I remember walking toward the place and feeling weirdly calm, like my guard dropped too early. That's usually when something slips in. Sophia suggested a small riverside boardwalk with food stalls instead of a bar. String lights hung low over the water, bugs flickering in and out of the glow. Everything smelled like fried dough and river mud. People wandered around in loose groups, laughing, stopping, moving again. It felt casual, almost temporary, like nothing here was meant to last long anyway. She was already there, leaning against the railing, watching the water instead of her phone. She smiled when she saw me and waved like she already knew how the night would go. That confidence felt reassuring at first. I didn't realize yet that it wasn't about me at all. We walked side by side, grabbing drinks, stopping to watch a street performer, making small comments about the lights reflecting on the water. She was easy to talk to, sharp but relaxed. She asked questions but didn't linger on answers. Everything moved forward smoothly, like a conveyor belt. The hook didn't come fast. It waited until I was comfortable. We sat on a wooden bench near the end of the boardwalk where the lights thinned out and the water went dark. The crowd noise faded just enough to hear the river slapping against the posts. She looked out at it for a second, then turned to me like she had decided something. She explained that she dated men she thought she could outgrow. Not quietly, not embarrassed, like it was a principle she had refined over time. She said she liked relationships that acted as steps. She said staying with someone too long could stall growth. She said progression mattered more than permanence. My brain snagged on the word outgrow. She kept going, calm and thoughtful. She said she was always moving toward a future version of herself. She said she chose partners who fit where she was now, not where she was headed. She said it made endings cleaner. I didn't know what to say. The river kept moving beside us, dark and steady, like it had heard all this before. Then she thanked me for being a good starting point. That was the moment my chest dropped. Not rejected, not insulted, categorized. I felt temporary by design. She didn't mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. Her tone stayed warm, almost appreciative. Like I had already helped just by showing up. Like my role had been fulfilled early. She said most men wanted to feel chosen forever. She said that expectation caused unnecessary pain. She said clarity was kinder. I stared at the water and tried to process what it meant to be thanked on a first date for something I had agreed to do. She talked about past relationships and stages. Not people. Stages. This one helped her build confidence. That one pushed her ambition. Another taught her boundaries. She spoke like she was flipping through chapters. I realized she never described anyone as someone she loved, just someone she passed through. The bench felt harder the longer I sat there. The wood pressed into my legs, grounding me in a way I didn't like. I felt like I was sitting on a marker in her timeline, already labeled. I asked what happened if someone wanted to grow together instead of apart. She smiled softly and said the ideas sounded romantic but rarely aligned. She said growth speeds never matched. She said someone always slowed the other down. I wondered which one she thought I was. She looked at me carefully then, not evaluating exactly, more like confirming. She said I seemed grounded, stable, early stage energy. She said those types made great beginnings. Beginnings? The word echoed in my head. I felt my mouth go dry. Every instinct told me to joke, to deflect, to pretend this wasn't landing heavy. Instead, I stayed quiet. A silence stretched. She didn't rush to fill it. She said she liked that I wasn't defensive. She said it showed emotional maturity. She said that was another reason I felt like a good fit for now. Now felt small, fragile, like something that would expire soon. I thought about all the effort people put into first dates. The choosing, the hoping, the risk. She had stripped all of that down to placement. It made everything feel thinner. People passed behind us, laughing, bumping shoulders, living inside moments they probably thought mattered. I wondered how many of them were being quietly outgrown by someone sitting next to them. She asked where I saw myself in a few years. I answered honestly, talking about stability, balance, building something steady. She nodded and said that made sense for me. She said her trajectory was steeper. Steeper than what? Than me. I noticed how easily she talked about leaving people behind without calling it that, how clean she made it sound, like shedding skin instead of cutting ties. I felt something pull back inside me. Not anger, not fear, distance. I realized I had stopped imagining a second date at all, not because I did like her, but because there was no room for me to imagine anything. The story had already been written past me. She said she believed in honoring people for what they offered at the time. She said she did believe in forcing alignment. She said endings didn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. She said all of this while sitting next to me on a bench, like this was just context, like she was actively placing me in her past while I was still present. I asked what she was looking for right now. She said momentum, reflection, companionship without expectation. She said she didn't want to promise more than she could give. Promise to who, I wondered. Not me. I had already been thanked. The river breeze picked up slightly, cool against my face. I breathed it in and felt something steady again. The night kept moving even if I didn't like how this part was shaped. She said she appreciated how well I was taking this. She said most men reacted with hurt or tried to change her mind. She said she respected that I wasn't doing either. I wasn't sure if that was true or if I was just tired. She stood up then and stretched, like the conversation had reached a natural end. She asked if I wanted to walk back toward the lights. I nodded, mostly because sitting still felt worse. We walked side by side again, but the energy was different now. Lighter for her, heavier for me. She pointed out a dessert stand she liked. I nodded and smiled when expected. It felt like going through motions after the outcome was already decided. Near the entrance, she stopped and turned toward me. She thanked me again. She said she enjoyed our talk. She said she wished me well in my journey. Journey sounded like goodbye language. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for clarification. There was nothing to clarify. She had been clear from the start once she chose to be. We parted without awkwardness. She walked back toward the crowd. I stayed still for a moment, watching her blend in like she had already moved on to the next frame. The lights looked different once she was gone. Harsher, less charming. The boardwalk felt like a hallway instead of a place to linger. I walked back to my car slowly, replaying the word starting point over and over. It was that she thought she would outgrow me. It was that she had already decided she would. When I got back to my live space, I sat on the floor instead of the couch. The floor felt solid, dependable. I pressed my palms into it and breathed until my chest loosened. Later that night, I thought about how strange it was to be appreciated for being temporary. How unsettling it felt to be chosen specifically because someone planned to leave you behind. She messaged me once, saying she hoped I didn't take things personally and that she valued the time we shared. I did reply. I didn't lock her either. I just let it sit there until the screen went dark. I don't mind being part of someone's story. I just don't want to be written in as a draft. I want to be with someone who doesn't thank me for being the beginning because they are too busy imagining an ending with me still there. The first weird feeling showed up before I even saw him, like my body was reacting to something my brain hadn't caught yet. I was standing in line waiting for coffee, staring at the chalk menu, and I suddenly felt exposed. Not washed exactly. More like slightly misaligned with the room. I brushed it off because that happens sometimes. Nerves, caffeine, whatever. I wish I had listened. Alex picked the place, a quiet corner coffee shop attached to a community print studio. Big windows, concrete floors, printers humming softly behind a glass wall. It smelled like ink and espresso, which I kind of liked. It felt creative, harmless, the kind of place where people brought laptops and stayed too long. He was already there, sitting at a small table near the back, angled toward the room, not toward the wall, toward everything. I didn't think about that until later. He smiled when he saw me and stood up quickly, almost too quickly, like he didn't want to miss the moment. Everything started normal, painfully normal, ordering drinks, talking about the space, laughing about how loud the printer sounded every time it kicked on. He was easy to talk to, attentive, maybe a little too polished, but I told myself that was confidence. I remember noticing his phone on the table, propped against his coffee cup instead of lying flat. I assumed he was waiting on a text or something. I didn't want to be rude by asking. I just adjusted my chair slightly so it wasn't in my direct line of sight. The conversation flowed. Work stuff, random stories, little opinions that didn't matter. I relaxed. I leaned in. I forgot about the phone. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist. About halfway through, he paused in a way that felt heavier than the other pauses. Not thinking. Preparing. He took a breath and said there was something he wanted to be upfront about. I expected a deal breaker. Kids, moving soon, something like that. Instead, he told me he records first dates. Not with shame, not apologetically, like it was a productivity hack. He said it helped him grow. My brain lagged behind the words. Record how? Audio, video, notes. I didn't even know which part to react to first. I stared at the phone and suddenly it looked different, heavier, more present. He explained that he liked to review conversations later, that it helped him notice patterns, that he caught habits he wanted to improve, that he believed reflection was easier with playback. Playback. I felt my consent arrived too late. I asked when he started recording. He said at the beginning, casually, like that was obvious, like that didn't change everything that had already happened. My chest tightened. Every laugh I had given him rewound in my head. Every story. Every expression. None of it felt like mine anymore. He said he usually told people eventually, that transparency mattered, that he wanted me to know before things went further. Before things went further than what, I wondered, further than being archived. I looked around the shop and suddenly felt like the walls were listening too. The printer behind the glass clanked loudly and I flinched. I hated that reaction. Hated that he noticed it. He noticed everything. He said he never shared the recordings, that they were just for him. That he deleted them after reviewing. That he wasn't doing anything wrong. That it was about self-improvement. Self-improvement felt like a blanket he kept throwing over sharp edges. I asked why he didn't ask first. He said asking changed behavior. He said he wanted authenticity. Authenticity that he took without permission. I felt heat rise in my face, not anger exactly, more like embarrassment mixed with panic. I imagined myself on his screen later, frozen mid-sentence, analyzed frame by frame. I imagined pauses being replayed, tone dissected, moments I thought were private turned into data. He said he learned more from the first 30 minutes than anything else. He said people revealed themselves before they knew they were being watched. Watched. That word echoed in my head, even though he didn't say it. I realized then that the discomfort I felt when I walked in wasn't random. My body had picked up on something my mind ignored. I asked if he was recording right now, and he nodded. My hands went cold. I wanted to stand up and leave immediately, but my legs felt glued to the chair. Part of me still wanted to be polite. That reflex made me angry at myself. He said he could stop if I wanted. He said he respected boundaries. He reached for the phone, but didn't turn it off yet. He waited. That wait felt like another test. I said yes. I wanted him to stop. My voice sounded thin. He tapped the screen and set the phone flat on the table. I watched his hands closely, wondering if that was enough. Wondering if there were other devices. Wondering if it mattered anymore. The damage was already done. The rest of the coffee tasted bitter. The room felt louder. Every sound made me jump slightly. I felt hyper-aware of my posture, my face, my breathing. The idea of being recorded had crawled into my skin and stayed there. He tried to continue the conversation like nothing had changed. Asked about my job again. Made a joke about the printer. I nodded, but it felt fake now. Everything felt staged, even though I was acting. I realized I didn't know which parts of the night were real anymore. The first half belonged to him. The second half felt like cleanup. I asked what he looked for when he reviewed the recordings. He said pacing. Interruptions. Eye contact. Moments where he seemed disengaged. Moments where the other person reacted negatively. He said it helped him adjust. Adjust into what, I wondered, a better performer. He said most people appreciated his honesty once they got past the initial surprise. He said growth required discomfort. That phrase again, like discomfort was currency. I felt something inside me shut down quietly. Not dramatically, just enough to protect what was left. I told him I didn't like it. Not just the recording, the mindset. I told him it felt invasive. I told him it took something from me without asking. He listened, nodding, like he was already reviewing this version of me in his head. He said my reaction made sense. He said consent timing was tricky. He said he would think about it. Think about it. As if my feelings were a case study. I looked at the clock on the wall and realized how slowly time was moving. Every minute felt thick. I didn't want to stay longer, but I also didn't want to rush out and look dramatic. I stood up instead. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound felt good, real. He looked surprised but not upset. He asked if I wanted to keep talking. I said no. I said I was done. He nodded and said he understood. He reached for his phone again and turned it face down. I hated that gesture. Like now it mattered. I grabbed my bag and walked out without looking back. The bell on the door chimed loudly, announcing my exit to everyone. I didn't care. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I took a deep breath and realized I had been holding it for most of the date. My hands were shaking slightly. I tucked them into my pockets and started walking. On the way home, I replayed the night in reverse. The laughter, the ease, the moment my guard dropped. Knowing it had been captured made my skin crawl. Not because of what I said, but because of how little control I had over it. When I got back to my live place, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. My heart was still racing. I slid down and sat on the floor, just breathing until the feeling passed. Later that night, I caught myself being extra careful with my phone camera, covering it, turning it face down. The thought that I had been recorded without knowing left a residue I didn't want. He messaged me once, apologizing if I felt uncomfortable, and saying he hoped I could see his intention. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and deleted the thread. Not because he wanted to grow. Because he decided my consent was optional until after the fact. I still go to that coffee shop sometimes. I sit in different seats now. I avoid the back corner. I keep my phone face down too, even when I'm alone. I don't mind reflection. I don't mind self-work, but I want to choose when I am being seen and by whom. That night taught me something I wish I didn't have to learn. Consent that arrives late isn't consent at all. The night started with that sharp alert feeling like I had already said something wrong even though I hadn't said anything yet. I remember locking my door twice and checking my pockets like I was headed into an exam instead of a date. I wasn't nervous in a fluttery way. It was heavier than that. Like my brain was loading rules I didn't remember agreeing to. Claire picked the place. A converted lecture hall turned wine lounge near a university campus. The seats were still tiered, sloping downward toward a small stage that now held a bar and a couple of stools. Chalkboards lined the walls, wiped but still ghosted with equations and half-erased diagrams. The lights were low except for small lamps clipped to the tables like you were supposed to read closely. I noticed that right away. Everything here was built for arguments. She was already seated when I arrived, notebook open, pen resting across the page. Not a phone. A notebook. She smiled, waved me down the steps, and waited until I sat before she spoke again. It felt formal without being polite, like the start of something timed. We ordered drinks and did the first few minutes of normal talk. Where we were from, how weird the place was, how the chalkboards made it feel like school never really ended. She laughed easily. I relaxed a little. That did last. The shift happened when she asked what opinions I felt strongest about. Not favorite movies, not music, opinions. I answered lightly at first, keeping it surface level. She nodded and asked me to explain why. I did. She countered immediately, not aggressively, just confidently, like she had been waiting for her turn. She asked me to defend it. That word stuck out. Defend. I thought she was joking. I smiled and added a bit more context. She shook her head slightly and pointed out flaws. She asked what evidence I had. She leaned forward, eyes bright, engaged in a way that felt competitive. Then she reached down and made a small mark in her notebook. I froze for half a second, pretending not to notice. I noticed. She explained then that she liked to challenge people early. She said it showed how they handled pressure. She said compatibility was about agreement. It was about resilience. She said she kept score of concessions to track flexibility. Kept score. My stomach tightened. She said it lightly like it was a fun quirk, like people wouldn't mind if they understood the reason. She said first dates were perfect for this because stakes were low. They didn't feel low to me anymore. The conversation turned into a series of positions. Every topic became something to hold or surrender. When I softened a statement, she noted it. When I clarified, she asked if that was a concession or a reframing. She waited for an answer before continuing. I felt like a debate exercise. The chopwords behind her started to bother me. The faint outlines of problems someone else had solved and erased. I wondered how many arguments had happened in this room before it turned into a lounge. How many people had sat here trying to be right? I tried steering things back to something neutral. Travel, food, random memories. She let it go for a minute, then tied it back to values, preferences, reasoning frameworks. Everything looped back to positions. Every time I get ground just to keep things smooth, her pen moved. I noticed how careful I became. How I chose words not for honesty, but for defensibility. I hated that. I wasn't even sure what I believed anymore, just what I could justify quickly. She said she respected people who didn't cling to weak arguments. She said adaptability mattered more than consistency. She said stubbornness was a red flag. I wondered where that left conviction. She brought up a topic she clearly cared about and asked where I stood. I answered honestly, knowing it wouldn't match hers. She smiled like a runner spotting a hill. She dismantled my points one by one. Not cruelly, efficiently. She asked questions that boxed me in. I tried to explain nuance. She interrupted gently and asked if I was conceding. I felt heat rise in my face. The room felt warmer, tighter. The lamps cast harsh little circles of light that made everything outside them disappear. I said I was conceding, just clarifying. She nodded and wrote something, then asked me to restate my position more clearly. My drink sat untouched. My mouth felt dry. I realized then that this wasn't about understanding. It was about tallying. Every softening, every pause, every attempt to meet in the middle counted as a loss. I asked her what she did with the scores. She said she reviewed them after. She said a high concession rate meant someone was agreeable but not grounded. A low rate meant rigidity. She said the sweet spot was rare. Sweet spot for what, I wondered. A partner or a sparring partner. The night stretched on like that, topic after topic, each one a small arena. I tried staying firm once, refusing to budge. She leaned back, arms crossed, and smiled like she had been waiting for that too. She said resistance was interesting. She said it showed ego investment. She said ego could be trained. Trained. That word landed heavy. I felt like I was being sized up not for who I was, but for how I argued. My laughter felt out of place. Humor didn't fit the format. At one point, she summarized my positions back to me. Not inaccurately, but flattened, stripped of context. She asked if I agreed with her summary. I hesitated, then nodded because correcting it felt exhausting. She marked another point. Something in me deflated then, not anger, resignation. I stopped pushing back as much. I let things slide. I watched the pen move faster. She noticed and asked if I was disengaging. I said I was tired. She nodded and said fatigue often led to concessions. That sentence made my chest ache. I looked around the room and noticed other couples leaning in, laughing softly, sharing plates. The slope of the seating made them look like an audience. I wondered if I looked like entertainment. She said she enjoyed this, that intellectual friction was attractive, that she liked relationships where growth came from challenge. She said comfort bred complacency. I thought about how growth didn't have to feel like losing. I tried to tell her that. I'd said connection mattered to me more than winning arguments. I said I liked discussions that didn't need a victor. She smiled kindly and said that sounded like avoidance of accountability. She wrote again. I felt myself disappear behind my own words, like anything I said could be turned into a point against me. The chop word behind her caught my eye again, a faint word still visible under eraser dust. Proof. I wondered what I was trying to prove and to whom. When the server came with a check, Claire suggested splitting. She said fairness mattered. She waited while I agreed. She made a small mark. I couldn't help it. I asked what that one was for. She said agreement without negotiation. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff. I felt like I had been sitting too straight for too long. I told her I was enjoying this, not the discussion, not the scoring, not the feeling of being measured. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She looked genuinely surprised. She said debate was how she connected. She said keeping score helped her notice patterns. She said most people appreciated the clarity. I didn't. I said I wanted a date, not a trial. She tilted her head and said trials revealed truth. I didn't argue. I grabbed my jacket and stepped up the aisle toward the exit. The slope felt steeper going up, like climbing out of something. Behind me, I heard the scratch of pen on paper one last time. Outside, the air was cool and uneven. Traffic passed, students laughed nearby, someone argued loudly on a phone. It all felt chaotic and real. My shoulders dropped without me telling them to. I walked a few blocks before stopping, just to breathe. My head buzzed with half-finished thoughts. I realized how tense my jaw had been and unclenched it slowly. On the way home, I replayed moments where I could have left earlier, where I stayed because I didn't want to look weak. That annoyed me. Strength was staying in something that made me feel small. When I got back to my live space, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The quiet felt earned. I stared at the wall until my breathing slowed. Later that night, a message came in. She said she enjoyed the sparring and thought we had potential. She said my concession rate improved toward the end. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and put my phone face down. I don't mind disagreement. I don't mind challenge. But I don't want connection turned into a scoreboard. I wasn't there to win or lose. I was there to be sharpened. I just wanted to be met. I knew something was off before I even sat down, like my body caught the vibe faster than my brain wanted to admit. It wasn't nerves. It was that hollow feeling you get when a place feels too clean for what it claims to be. I remember standing outside the spot you picked, staring at the door handle, wondering why my shoulders were already tight. Rayan chose a co-working cafe that doubled as a meal prep place. Half the room was laptops and timers. The other half was stainless counters and portion containers stacked like bricks. Everything smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. The chairs were hard on purpose. The lighting was bright in that way that doesn't flatter anyone. It felt the place where people came to optimize themselves, not relax. He was already there, sitting straight, phone face down, notebook open. Not a cute notebook. A structured one with tabs. I noticed it before I noticed his face. That should have been my sign. We ordered food and sat across from each other. He nodded politely, smiled briefly, and got right into it. No warm-up. No small talk buffer. He asked about my habits. Not hobbies. Habits. Sleep schedule. Work hours. How often I cooked. How I handled mornings. How I planned weekends. The questions came one after another, evenly spaced, like he was following a template. He didn't interrupt, but he didn't react either. He just waited, eyes steady, pen moving. It felt like an interview without the promise of a paycheck. I tried to lighten things up a few times. Little jokes, small comments about the place. He acknowledged them but didn't follow them. He brought it right back to systems, routines, outputs. He said efficiency mattered more than chemistry. He said it calmly, like it was obvious, like anyone who thought otherwise was being sentimental. That sentence landed heavy and stayed there. I started noticing what was being asked. Nothing about what made me laugh. Nothing about what made me sad. Nothing about how I felt around people. Warmth was not on the list. The more I answered, the smaller I felt. Not because my answers were bad, but because they didn't seem to matter beyond how neatly they fit. When I mentioned enjoying slow mornings sometimes, he paused and wrote something longer. When I said I liked spontaneous plans now and then, his pen stopped completely before continuing. I wondered what that meant. The cafe noise blurred into a low hum. Keyboards clacked. Blenders whirred. Timers beeped somewhere behind the counter. It all felt rhythmic and cold. I felt like I was sitting inside a machine. He asked how I handled inefficiency in others. Not conflict. Inefficiency. He asked if it frustrated me or motivated me. I answered honestly and said it depended on context. He frowned slightly and wrote again. Context did seem welcome. I realized then that he wasn't curious. He was sorting, not even judging, categorizing. He explained his approach without hesitation. He said relationships failed because people ignored logistics. He said attraction faded but habits stayed. He said chemistry was unreliable. He said systems lasted. Systems. The word echoed in my head. I thought about how I laughed too loud sometimes. How I changed plans last minute when something felt right. How I liked sitting on the floor talking until time disappeared. None of that had a box. I asked him what he enjoyed doing. He answered briefly, efficiently. workouts, meal prep, scheduling, tracking progress. He didn't ask me back. I felt like I was watching myself get reduced to a chart in real time. Every answer shaved something off me. I started editing without meaning to, trimming stories, simplifying feelings. I hated that I was doing it. He asked how I handled downtime. I said I didn't always need to be productive. I liked moments that weren't optimized. His pen paused again. He looked up and said idle time often hid avoidance. That hit harder than it should have. I felt heat in my face. Not anger. Embarrassment. Like I had been caught doing something wrong by enjoying myself. I looked around the room and noticed how everyone else seemed absorbed in their own tasks. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was lingering. It felt like a temple for output. I didn't belong there, and neither did the state. He checked his watch at one point and said we were on track. On track for what? I didn't know. The food arrived in neat containers, portioned perfectly. I took a bite and tasted nothing. My stomach felt tight. I pushed the container aside and wrapped my hands around my drink just to feel something warm. He noticed and wrote something else. I asked him what he was writing. He said notes. He said it helped him stay objective. He said feelings could cloud judgment. That was when it really clicked. Warmth wasn't missing by accident. It was excluded on purpose. I thought about reaching across the table and closing the notebook. The urge was strong and childish and satisfying just to imagine. I didn't do it. Instead, I went quiet. He noticed that too. He asked if I was disengaging. I said I was thinking. He nodded and said reflection was good, but momentum mattered. Momentum toward what, I wondered. Toward fitting. He asked if I had long-term goals. I said yes, but they changed as I grew. He tilted his head and said adaptability could be a risk factor if unmanaged. I felt like I was shrinking with every label, like my edges were being sanded down to fit into his ideal shape. I didn't even know what that shape was, just that I wanted it. I realized then that I didn't want to be efficient with him. I wanted to be human, and that wasn't on his list. I stood up slowly. My legs felt stiff, like I had been sitting in the same position too long. He looked surprised, but not upset. Curious, if anything. I said I needed to go. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I just knew that staying would mean disappearing a little more. He asked if it was because of incompatibility. I nodded. That felt accurate enough. He said that was efficient feedback. I walked out of the cafe into the open air and felt my chest expand like I had been holding my breath for an hour. The street noise felt loud and messy and perfect. Cars honked. Someone laughed. A dog barked. It all felt alive. I stood there for a minute just breathing, letting my shoulders drop. My hands were shaking slightly. I tucked them into my pockets and started walking. On the way home, I thought about how close I had come to staying just to be polite. How easy it would have been to keep answering questions, keep trimming myself down, keep trying to fit. That scared me. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt solid and forgiving. I leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet wrap around me. Later that night, a message came through. He thanked me for my time and said he appreciated the clarity. I didn't reply. I deleted it and blocked the number. Not because he was mean, because he was empty in a way that would have hollowed me out too. I don't need someone who measures life in outputs and calls it love. I don't need to be efficient with my heart. Warmth might not be productive, but it's the only thing that ever made me feel real. The day felt too open, like the sky was watching me back. No clouds, no wind, just that stretched out quiet that makes sounds travel farther than they should. I remember tying my shoes twice, even though they were already tight, just to kill a few seconds. I wasn't nervous in the usual way. It was more like my body was slowing me down on purpose. Megan suggested a walk instead of drinks. She said she liked movement because it kept things honest. That sounded fine. Harmless. I liked the idea of not being stuck across a table trying to impress someone. A walk felt equal. Side by side. Nothing to hide behind. We met at a long public trail that cut through an old floodplain by the river. Half gravel, half dirt, lined with tall grass that leaned into the path like it wanted to listen. The river was low that week, slow and brown, dragging itself along. Joggers passed every now and then, headphones in, eyes forward, like they were avoiding everyone else's lives. Megan waved when she saw me, relaxed and confident, already mid-step like she had been walking before I got there. She didn't stop fully, just matched my pace. That felt natural. I liked that. For the first few minutes, it really was just a walk. Weather, work, how weird it was that the trail existed right next to traffic. She asked questions but didn't push. I felt myself settle into my stride, matching hers without thinking. That should have been a good sign. The hook came quietly, like she didn't expect it to land heavy. She said she often dated men outside her values. Not in a guilty way, not apologetic. She said it like a strategy, like something she had tested and refined. She said it proved she could change them. The words hit me a second late. I almost laughed because my brain wanted to treat it like a joke. It was. She kept walking, eyes forward, like she was describing a workout routine. She said growth required friction. She said love was a tool. She said people didn't change unless someone challenged them directly. My steps slowed without me meaning to. She noticed and adjusted her pace, slowing too, keeping us aligned. That detail stuck with me longer than the words. I asked what she meant by change. She said values, habits, blind spots. She said men were often unaware of how much improvement they needed until someone pointed it out consistently. She said consistency was key. The trail narrowed where tree roots broke through the dirt. I watched my feet carefully, half to avoid tripping, half to avoid thinking too hard. The river gurgled softly to our right, like it was whispering something I couldn't hear. She asked where I thought I needed improvement. The question didn't feel curious. It felt like onboarding. I felt recruited. My chest tightened. Not panic, just pressure. Like someone had just handed me paperwork and a pen. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to without stepping into whatever she was building. She glanced at me then, quick but focused, like she was checking my reaction. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She waited. I said something vague about always working on communication. The safest answer I could think of. The kind of thing you say in interviews. It felt gross coming out of my mouth. She nodded, satisfied, and said awareness was a good starting point. She said she usually began there. Began. That word sat heavy between us as we walked. She talked about past relationships next. Not emotionally. Analytically. She described men she had dated in terms of before and after. Who they were when she met them. Who they became once she helped them see things differently. She framed it like progress reports. I noticed she never mentioned how they felt about it. We passed a wooden sign warning about unstable ground ahead. The dirt dipped closer to the river, uneven and soft. I watched her step confidently across it, not hesitating. I followed, feeling the ground shift slightly under my shoe. She said some men resisted at first. She said resistance was normal. She said it usually meant she was touching something important. She said persistence mattered more than comfort. I realized then that she didn't see disagreement as a boundary. She saw it as material. My thoughts started racing. I tried to imagine what it would look like to be with someone who saw me as a project. How every opinion could become a starting point for correction. How every flaw could become a goal. She asked what values mattered most to me. I told her a few. Honesty, independence, space to be myself. I watched her face carefully as I said it. Something flickered there, quick and unreadable. She said independence was often code for avoidance. She said people who valued space usually needed accountability instead. She said that like it was a fact. I felt my jaw tighten. The urge to argue flared and died just as fast. Arguing felt pointless, like she would just add it to a list. The trail curved away from the road then, quieter, more isolated. The grass grew taller, brushing my legs as we walked. The river widened, its surface broken by slow ripples. I noticed how far we were from the entrance and wondered when I had stopped paying attention. She talked about her mission like it was something noble, like she was doing men a favor by not giving up on them as they were. She said settling wasn't loving. She said potential mattered more than comfort. Potential felt like another word for unfinished. She asked again what I thought I needed to work on. This time she waited longer. Her eyes stayed on my face, not blinking much. I felt heat creep up my neck. I said I didn't really believe in changing people to fit someone else. I said growth had to come from inside. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She smiled then. Not wide, pleased. She said that belief was common among men who underestimated how much influence relationships had. She said influence wasn't force. She said it was guidance. She said guidance worked best when someone didn't know they needed it. My stomach dropped. I thought about how easily this walk had turned, how a simple idea like movement and fresh air had become a slow interview about my flaws. I felt stupid for not noticing sooner. We reached a bench overlooking the river, and she suggested sitting. I didn't want to, but stopping felt easier than walking further into it. We sat side by side, the wood rough under my hands. She asked how I handle feedback. Not criticism, feedback. She asked if I got defensive or curious. She said curiosity was a sign of readiness. Readiness. The river moved slowly in front of us, dragging leaves along its surface. I watched one spin in a small whirl near the bank, trapped but still moving. I told her I listened to feedback but valued autonomy. She nodded and said autonomy often needed recalibration. She said most people overestimated their self-awareness. I felt smaller then, not physically, internally, like my sense of myself was being nudged aside to make room for her framework. She started outlining what early change usually looked like, small adjustments, language shifts, new habits. She said it was important to start early before patterns set. She said first dates were ideal for establishing direction. Direction away from where I already was. I looked out at my hands and realized they were clenched. I forced them to relax. I didn't want to be reactive. I didn't want to give her another example. I asked what happened if someone didn't want to change. She shrugged lightly and said those men usually didn't last long. She said attraction faded when there was no movement. Movement toward what, I wondered. Toward her. I stood up before I fully decided to. The bench scraped softly against my leg. She looked up at me, surprised but not upset, curious again. I said I needed to head back. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. My heart was pounding harder than the walk justified. She stood too, matching my posture, still calm. She said leaving early was often a sign of fear around growth. She said that gently, like she was offering out. I didn't take it. I started walking back toward the entrance, not fast, just steady. She walked with me for a bit, still talking about change, about how people resisted what could help them. Her words blurred together after a while like background noise. Halfway back, she stopped walking. I kept going. I didn't look back. The rest of the trail felt longer than before. Every step felt like reclaiming something small. My breath slowly evened out. The road noise grew louder as I got closer to the entrance, grounding me. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked it. I sat inside for a minute before starting the engine, just breathing, staring at the dashboard. On the drive home, I replayed the walk in pieces. The question, the smile, the way disagreement fed her certainty. I felt a mix of relief and anger, not at her, but at how close I had come to stepping into something that would have rewritten me slowly. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt solid, unchanging. I pressed my palms against it and stayed there until my shoulders dropped. Later that night, I thought about how easy it was to confuse interest with intention. How someone could sound thoughtful while already planning your edits. She texted me once, thanking me for the walk and saying she enjoyed our conversation. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and put my phone face down. I don't mind growing. I don't mind being challenged. But I don't want to be recruited into someone else's self-appointed mission. I was there for a walk. I didn't sign up to be changed. The night did start wrong. It started too smooth, which somehow felt worse. I remember brushing my teeth and thinking how quiet my apartment felt, like the walls were listening. I wasn't nervous exactly. I just felt I was stepping into something already set up, like a board game where the pieces were placed before I arrived. Josh picked the place, a late-night diner attached to a 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town. It was the kind of spot people only went to when they didn't want to be seen or didn't care anymore. Washers thumped through the wall like a slow heartbeat. The air smelled like soap and burnt coffee. Half the lights flickered like they were tired of trying. He was already there when I walked in, sitting in a vinyl booth with his jacket draped beside him. He stood up, smiled, did all the right things. Nothing flashy. Nothing weird yet. I remember thinking he looked safe in a boring way. That thought didn't age well. We ordered food and talked lightly at first. Work stuff. Dumb city complaints. How weird it was that people did laundry at midnight like it was normal. He was easy to talk to. Funny without trying. Relaxed in a way that made me relax too. I hated that later, how easy it was. The hook didn't come with drama. It slipped in like it was nothing. He mentioned a small detail about his life that didn't quite line up with something he had said earlier. I caught it, but didn't say anything. People misspeak. Dates are messy. I figured I would let it go. Then he corrected himself. Not corrected, admitted. He told me he had lied. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't rush to explain it away. He just said it plainly, like he was checking the weather. He said he lied early on purpose. He said it helped him see how forgiving someone was. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. He smiled when I questioned him. That smile was playful. It wasn't cruel either. It was curious, like he was watching a gauge move. He explained his system without hesitation. He said everyone lies eventually. He said the timing mattered more than the act. He said early lies revealed boundaries. He said forgiveness was a spectrum, and he liked to know where people fell. I stared at the table, and a scratch of the laminate shaped like a lightning bolt. The washer behind the wall slammed harder, like it was reacting too. I asked what kind of lies he told. He said small ones. Harmless ones. Things that didn't really matter. He said if someone reacted strongly, it told them they weren't flexible. He said if they brushed it off, it told them they were understanding. Understanding felt like a trap word in that moment. I asked what happened if someone forgave too easily. He laughed softly and said that told him something too. My chest felt tight. The booth suddenly felt too small. I realized I was sitting in a test I didn't agree to take. He talked about past dates casually. Not names, just reactions. Some people got upset. Some people joked. Some people tried to justify the lie for him. He said those were interesting. Interesting. I could feel myself becoming careful. Every response felt like it might get categorized. I hated how my mind immediately tried to choose the safest option. Laugh it off or confront him. Forgive or walk away. I didn't want to be any of those things on command. I told him I didn't like being lied to. I said it made me uncomfortable. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He nodded, still smiling, and said discomfort was part of the point. He said forgiveness only mattered if there was tension first. That's when I felt like a threshold. Not a person. A gate. Something to be crossed or not. The diner noise faded into the background. Forks clinked somewhere. A dryer beeped behind the wall. Everything felt far away. I could see his mouth moving, but it was like my brain was half a second behind. He said he liked to see how people negotiated trust in real time. He said words didn't matter as much as what people were willing to tolerate. He said tolerance predicted longevity. I thought about all the times I had excused behavior because it seemed small. All the times I had been told I was too sensitive or too rigid. I felt something in me pull back hard, like a rubber band stretched too far. I asked him if he ever told the truth early to see how people reacted. He tilted his head like he hadn't considered that. Then he said honesty didn't create the same pressure. Pressure, there it was. I noticed then how calm he was. How none of this cost him anything. He wasn't risking anything by lying. He was the one being tested. He was collecting reactions like samples. The food arrived. I barely touched it. The smell made my stomach twist. He ate normally, like nothing heavy had just landed on the table between us. I watched his hands while he talked. Steady, relaxed, like he was completely at ease watching me process this. I realized he wasn't nervous because he didn't care how I responded, only what my response meant. I felt small in a way I didn't expect. Not scared. Measured. He asked if I was mad. I said I was thinking. He nodded and said thinking was good. He said most people rush past that part. He leaned back in the booth and looked at me like I was a math problem he had already solved, but wanted to watch me work through anyway. I tried to explain why it bothered me. How trust wasn't something you poked to see what happened. How starting with a lie felt backwards. My words felt clumsy, like I was defending something basic that shouldn't need defending. He listened politely. Then he said my reaction showed I had a firm boundary around honesty. He said that was valuable information. Information. I felt my throat tighten. I realized he was hearing me. He was labeling me. The washer thumped again. I counted the seconds between spins just to stay grounded. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to give him anything dramatic to note. I told him I didn't want to be part of his system. I said I came to meet a person, not to be evaluated. He smiled again, smaller this time. He said opting out was also a response. He said it told him I wasn't forgiving enough for what he wanted. There it was, the verdict. I felt dismissed and judged at the same time, like I had failed a test I did believe in. I slid out of the booth slowly. My legs felt weak, like they had forgotten how to work. I grabbed my jacket and stood there for a second, waiting for him to say something normal, something human. He didn't. He just watched me like he was curious how I would exit, fast or slow, angry or calm. I walked out of the diner into the cold night air. The laundromat lights buzzed behind me. Cars passed on the road, tires hissing on pavement. The world felt loud and real again in a way that made my eyes sting. I stood there breathing until my hands stopped shaking. On the way home, my phone stayed silent. No message. No follow-up. I realized he probably didn't reach out when people walked away. The data was already collected. When I got back to my live place, I locked the door and leaned against it for a long moment. The quiet wrapped around me. I slid down and sat on the floor, knees pulled in, just letting the feeling drain out slowly. Later that night, I replayed the smile he gave me when I questioned him. Not mocking. Not apologetic. Assessing. That smile bothered me more than the lie itself. I thought about how easy it would be to cross that threshold without noticing, to forget something small and then something else, to slowly adjust to tests you never agreed to take. The next morning, I blocked his number without checking if he had texted. I didn't need closure. I didn't need an explanation. I needed distance. I still believe people mess up. I still believe forgiveness matters. But I don't believe in people who manufacture harm just to see what sticks. I was there to be measured. I was there to prove how much I could take. I was there to be a threshold someone leaned on to see if it would hold. I was there for dinner. And somehow that made all the difference. I knew something was wrong the moment the pauses started feeling scheduled. Not awkward pauses. Not thinking pauses. The kind where someone stops, checks their phone, waits, then looks back up like they just got instructions. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Nerves can do that. They make patterns out of nothing. But by the third pause, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain away. Natalie picked the place. A rooftop lounge above a closed furniture store, hidden behind a stairwell that smelled like dust and old paint. Inside, the bar was narrow and dark, with purple lights running along the edges like a cheap attempt at mystery. Music thumped low enough that you had to lean in to hear each other, but not loud enough to disappear into. It was the kind of place that felt temporary, like it would be gone in 6 months and nobody would miss it. She was already there, sitting at a high table near the railing, phone face up, screen glowing softly. She smiled when she saw me and waved casually like we were meeting friends instead of each other. That should have felt easy. It didn't. We ordered drinks and did the opening stretch of conversation. Light stuff. How the week had gone. How weird the stairs were. How the city looked from that height. She laughed at the right moments. Nodded when she was supposed to. Everything was fine in a way that felt rehearsed. Then she told me about the group chat. She said it casually, like it was no big deal. She said she shared date details with her group chat in real time. She said it helped her stay grounded. She said her friends were protective and liked to weigh in. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. She didn't ask if I was okay with it. She didn't frame it like a habit she was trying to break. She said it like a setting she had turned on. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, typed something quickly, then placed the phone back on the table, screen still facing up. I caught a glimpse of multiple profile pictures stacked at the top of the screen. Little circles, too many to count. The first pause happened then. She stopped mid-movement like she had hit a wall. Her eyes stayed on the phone. Not scrolling. Waiting. I sat there with my drink halfway to my mouth, unsure whether to finish the motion. When the phone buzzed again, she relaxed and looked back at me, smiling. She said her friends thought the view was nice. I laughed, but it came out then. The night kept moving, but not smoothly. Every few minutes, she would check her phone. Sometimes she typed. Sometimes she just waited. The pauses lined up with moments where I had just said something about myself. A story. An opinion. A dumb joke. It felt like everything went through a filter before she responded. I started feeling like I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to a room full of people I couldn't see. She explained more as the drinks went down. She said her group chat had rules, screenshots, quick polls, red flag alerts. She said they had saved her from bad situations before. She said they knew her better than anyone. I wondered what they were seeing of me, my posture, my expressions, my pauses, whether she was describing me fairly or compressing me into whatever fit the moment. She held the phone closer to her body after that, but not away from me. Like she wanted me to know it was still there, watching. At one point, she leaned in to listen to me talk about my job. I was mid-sentence when her phone buzzed again. She froze. Actually froze. Eyes locked on the screen. I stopped talking without meaning to. The sentence died between us. She waited. The seconds stretched. The music thumped. Someone laughed loudly at the bar behind us. The city lights flickered in the distance. I felt heat creep up my neck. Finally, she looked up and nodded like something had been confirmed. She said, "Go on." I didn't remember what I had been saying. I realized then that I felt watched. Not by her, by them. Every time she paused, I imagined a dozen eyes scanning a message about me, guessing my intentions, ranking my responses, deciding whether I was safe or boring or wrong. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her face instead of the phone, but my eyes kept drifting back to the glowing screen. It felt like a third person at the table. No, more than that, like a jury. She didn't hide it. She said transparency mattered. She said she didn't believe in pretending dates existed in a vacuum. She said her friends were part of her decision-making. Decision-making. That phrase stuck in my head. I asked her what she shared exactly. She said highlights, impressions, things I said that stood out. She said sometimes she quoted directly. I felt my stomach drop. The idea of my words leaving my mouth and landing in a chat I would never see made my skin crawl. I thought about how easily tone could be lost, how a half-joke could look bad in text, how context evaporated. She smiled like she understood my concern. She said they were good at reading between the lines. Another buzz, another pause. This one was longer. She tilted her head slightly while reading, lips pressed together. I watched her expression change, not dramatically, just enough to notice. When she looked back at me, something had shifted. Not colder, more cautious. I wondered what had just been said about me. The rest of the date started feeling like a performance review I had prepared for. I found myself choosing words carefully, avoiding topics, smoothing edges. I hated that I was doing it and couldn't stop. She asked me a question about past relationships. I answered honestly but briefly. Her phone buzzed before she responded. She waited again. When she looked up, she asked a follow-up that felt less curious and more strategic, like it came from somewhere else. I wanted to ask her to stop, to put the phone away, to be here. But the thought of being added to the chat as controlling or insecure stopped me. I hated that too. The rooftop started to feel exposed, like the whole city could see us. The railing felt too low, the table too small. I imagined invisible threads running from her phone out into the night, connecting us to living rooms and couches and beds where strangers were forming opinions about me. At one point, she excused herself to the restroom. She took the phone with her. The silence she left behind was heavy but relieving. I sat there alone, staring at the empty chair, trying to remember what it felt like to not be observed. When she came back, she looked energized, like she had just gotten advice. She told me her friends thought I was interesting but reserved. She said that like it was feedback she was passing along. I didn't know how to respond. Saying nothing felt like confirming it. Another buzz, another pause. She waited longer this time. I noticed she didn't even look at me while waiting. I wondered if I had already lost. I realized then that this wasn't about safety or connection. It was about consensus. She was getting to know me. She was outsourcing the decision of whether I was worth knowing. I felt small in a way that surprised me. Not angry, just reduced. The check came and she reached for it, then stopped. She glanced at her phone again, waited, then nodded and paid. I wondered if that had been debated too. We stood up and walked toward the stairs. The night air felt cooler, sharper. She walked slightly ahead of me, phone already in her hand, typing as she went. I imagined the message being sent before I even reached the door. At the top of the stairs, she turned and thanked me for the night. She said her friends liked my vibe. She said she would talk it over with them and let me know. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded. She smiled and disappeared down the steps, already typing again. I stood there for a minute, listening to the muffled music below and the traffic above. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, even though it hadn't buzzed. On the way home, I kept replaying the pauses, the waiting, the way my words felt like they belonged to other people now. I wondered if they were still talking about me, if I was still on the screen. When I got back to my live place, I tossed my jacket over a chair and sat on the floor. The quiet felt deep and personal. No buzzing, no waiting, just me. Later that night, a message came through. She said she had fun and would check back in after getting final thoughts. Final thoughts, like a verdict. I didn't reply. I didn't want to be discussed anymore. I blocked the number and set my phone face down. Sometimes now, when someone checks their phone too much while talking to me, my chest tightens. I notice the pauses. I notice where attention goes. I don't mind being talked about. I mind being watched by people who never asked if I wanted to be part of the room. I didn't feel nervous getting ready, which should have been my first clue. Usually there is at least a flicker of something, even if it is just choosing shoes. That night felt flat, like I was heading to an errand instead of a date. I remember checking the mirror and thinking I looked fine. Not great, not bad, just fine. That word followed me longer than it should have. Kevin picked the restaurant, a small basement place under an old movie theater. You had to walk past faded posters and down a narrow stairwell that smelled like popcorn and damp concrete. Inside, it was dim and tight, tables close enough that you could hear forks hitting plates 2 tables over. It felt a place people went to focus on whoever they were with, whether they wanted to or not. He was already seated when I arrived, phone on the table, screen dark. He stood up, smiled, did everything right in the most standard way possible. Nothing felt off yet. That almost made it worse later. We ordered and did the usual opening lap. Work, schedules, how long we had lived in the city. He nodded a lot. He listened. I noticed he glanced at his phone occasionally, but did pick it up. It felt polite, controlled. The hook came after the food arrived. He said he wanted to be transparent. That word should have slowed me down, but instead it made me relax. Transparency sounded mature, responsible, like something you wanted in a person. He admitted he had been on 3 other dates that week. I shrugged it off at first. Dating apps make that normal whether people say it or not. I appreciated the honesty, I thought. Then he told me he was comparing. Not in a vague way, not in a joking way. He said he kept notes so he could be fair to everyone. He said it helped him avoid leading people on. He said he didn't want to waste anyone's time. Before I could respond, he turned his phone toward me. He showed me his notes. It went hidden. It was brief. He scrolled slowly, like he was giving a presentation. Names were shortened to initials. Mine was there yet. Above it were 3 others, each with bullet points underneath. Things like communication style, energy level, conflict tolerance, future alignment. Short phrases. Check marks. Question marks. A few lines crossed out. I felt reduced to bullet points instantly. My stomach dropped, but my face didn't move. I didn't want to give him the reaction he might write down later. I could feel myself pulling inward, getting smaller behind my ribs. He said he wanted me to see because he believed openness built trust. He said I deserved to know how he made decisions. He said I could ask questions. I didn't want to ask anything. I wanted the phone off the table. I wanted my food to disappear. I wanted to rewind 10 minutes and leave the stairwell instead of walking down it. He put the phone back between us, face down again, like it was just another utensil. The rest of the dinner changed shape after that. Every sentence felt like material. Every laugh felt like a data point. I could almost see the bullet forming before I finished a thought. I noticed how he paused after I spoke, like he was mentally typing. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes his lips pressed together slightly. I wondered what symbol that was, check mark or question mark. I caught myself editing my answers not to impress him, but to avoid being misunderstood. Then I realized that was the same thing. I hated how quickly I slipped into it. He mentioned one of the other dates casually, not by name, just by trait. He said someone else had a similar job to mine but less flexibility. He said another had great energy but poor follow-through. He said these things like he was talking about shoes he had tried it on. I stared at my plate and pushed food around without tasting it. The restaurant noise faded into a dull hum. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. I asked him why he thought showing me this was a good idea. He said most people appreciated clarity once they got past the initial discomfort. He said discomfort didn't mean something was wrong. It just meant something was honest. Honest felt like a blunt object in that moment. I realized then that he wasn't trying to connect. He was trying to optimize. I was a person across the table. I was a variable. The lighting felt harsher as the night went on. Shadows cut across his face when he leaned forward. I wondered if he knew how detached he sounded or if that was the point. He asked me what I thought of the system. I tried to answer without giving him anything useful. I said it seemed efficient. The word tasted bad in my mouth. He smiled, satisfied, and nodded. I knew that nod would turn into a bullet. I wondered where the notes went afterward, if there was a spreadsheet, if there were rankings, if I would be item 4 forever, or if I would get promoted or archived. I tried steering the conversation towards something human. Music, random stories, dumb memories. He listened, but it did change the tone. Everything fun felt like a distraction he was politely allowing. At one point, he mentioned he had blocked out time on his calendar later that night to update his notes. He said it helped him process while things were fresh. Fresh. I felt my chest tighten. The idea of being summarized while still warm from the chair made my skin crawl. I stopped talking as much after that. I nodded more. I let silences stretch. He noticed, of course. He asked if I was tired. I said I was fine. He nodded again. I felt like I was watching myself fail an exam I never studied for and didn't want to pass anyway. When the check came, he reached for it quickly. He said he preferred to pay on first dates to keep things simple. Simple felt like another metric. We stood up and walked back toward the stairs. The narrow space forced us close together. I could feel the warmth from his arm without wanting it. The movie posters looked creepier on the way out, faces half peeled from the wall, eyes faded. Outside, the night air felt too loud. Traffic, voices, a bus hissing nearby. I stopped at the top of the stairs and took a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. He said he would update his notes later and let me know where things stood. He said that like it was considerate. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded and stepped back. We separated without drama. No awkward lingering. No confusion. He walked one way, I walked the other. It felt clean, like a transaction had ended. On the way home, my phone stayed silent. I didn't want it to buzz. I didn't want to see my name turned into initials with bullets underneath. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt solid. Grounding. I stayed there longer than necessary, just letting my body expand back to its normal size. Later that night, I thought about how easy it would be to do what he did, to categorize, to rank, to reduce people to manageable pieces. The thought made me sad in a tired way. The next day, a message came through. He thanked me for dinner and said he would be in touch after reviewing his notes. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread and blocked the number. Not because I was angry, because I didn't want to be item 4. Sometimes now, when I catch myself mentally ranking people, I stop. I think about that phone on the table, those bullets, how quickly a person can disappear when you shrink them down enough. I don't want transparency that turns people into summaries. I want connection that can't fit into notes. The night didn't feel scary at first. It felt quiet in a way that made me lower my guard. The kind of calm that tricks you into opening doors you usually keep shut. I remember thinking I was overdue for something simple, something low effort, something that didn't feel like a performance. That's probably why I agreed so fast when Hannah suggested tea instead of drinks. The place was a botanical conservatory with a small tea counter tucked inside. Glass walls, damp air, plants brushing your shoulders as you walked through narrow paths. It smelled green and sweet, and a little like dirt. The tables were scattered between huge leaves and hanging vines, like the furniture had grown there by accident. It felt private without being hidden, safe without being empty. Hannah was already there, sitting straight-backed at a metal table, hands wrapped around a cup like she needed the heat. She looked comfortable in the space, like she had chosen it carefully. I noticed how she watched me approach, not in a flirty way, just attentive. I told myself that was a good sign. We started easy. Surface stuff. Work, schedules, How weird it was that this place existed in the middle of the city. She listened closely. Maybe too closely. I noticed she didn't interrupt, but she didn't fill silence either. She let gaps sit there until I spoke again. It felt like she was letting me hang myself with my own words, even though I didn't know why yet. The shift happened when she asked about my childhood. Not a casual question, not the kind people ask to fill time. It came with focus. She asked about my parents, but not what they did. She asked how they handled stress. She asked who made decisions in the house. She asked what I learned to do when things got tense. I hesitated, then answered. I told myself honesty was fine, that everyone had a past, that this was normal. I didn't realize yet that I was walking into a scan, not a conversation. She leaned in slightly as I talked. Her eyes stayed on my face, not drifting, not softening. I noticed how she nodded at certain points, not in encouragement, but in recognition, like something was matching a pattern she already knew. She asked follow-ups that felt too specific to be casual. What happened when I disagreed with adults? Whether I felt heard growing up? How I handled mistakes as a kid? Every question pulled another thread loose. I could feel memories surfacing that I didn't usually touch on first dates or second ones, or most conversations at all. I started feeling exposed in a way that didn't feel mutual. She shared almost nothing about herself. Every time I tried to pivot, she gently redirected back to me. She said understanding foundations mattered. She said early patterns shaped everything. The plants around us started to feel like walls instead of decoration. The air was warm and heavy. My tea went untouched, cooling between my hands. I answered honestly anyway, not because I wanted to, but because stopping felt rude. Like I had already agreed to this depth just by sitting there. I talked about feeling responsible early, about learning to stay quiet in certain moments, about noticing moods before words. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't complain. I just stated things the way I always had. Halfway through a sentence, she stopped me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look upset. She just held up a finger slightly and tilted her head like she had reached the conclusion she needed. She said she avoided men with unresolved patterns. The words landed heavy and flat, not cruel. Final. I felt disqualified mid-sentence. I didn't even finish the thought I was on. It hung there between us like unfinished homework. My mouth closed automatically. My body reacted faster than my brain. My shoulders dropped. My chest tightened. It felt like the floor had shifted just enough to throw off my balance. She explained calmly that she had learned to recognize signs early, that it saved time and emotional labor, that unresolved patterns always resurfaced later. She said this like she was explaining why she didn't eat certain foods anymore. I didn't argue. I couldn't. It wasn't framed as an opinion. It was a diagnosis. The worst part was how kind her tone stayed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't judging me as a person. She was sorting me, categorizing, deciding I didn't qualify for the role she had in mind. I asked what she meant by unresolved. She said the fact that I was still describing those dynamics meant they were active. She said resolution showed up as neutrality. She said emotional distance from childhood was the goal. I realized then that no answer would help me. Defending myself would look defensive. Disagreeing would look like denial. Agreeing would confirm the issue. The outcome was already set. I felt myself go quiet, not in protest, in retreat. She noticed that too. She said withdrawal was common after disqualification. She said it usually came with shame. She said shame was another indicator. I stared at the steam rising from my cup and watched it disappear into the glass ceiling. My hands felt numb around the ceramic. I thought about how quickly I had gone from potential to problem. The conservatory suddenly felt too open. People walked by on the paths, laughing softly, brushing leaves aside. Nobody noticed anything wrong. I wanted someone to accidentally bump into our table to break the moment. It didn't happen. She shifted the conversation after that, but it didn't matter. Whatever she asked felt hollow, like we were just filling the remaining time out of politeness. She'd already made her call. I was no longer being considered. I was being wrapped up. I kept thinking about that word unresolved. How final it sounded. How permanent, like something stamped on a file. I wondered how many men had sat across from her opening pieces of themselves only to get cut off like that. How many had thought they were sharing when they were actually screening? My mind went back to the moment she stopped me. The exact second my sentence died. I replayed it over and over, wondering what would have happened if I had finished. Then I realized it wouldn't have changed anything. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I nodded. I responded when needed. My voice sounded far away from my own ears. She seemed relaxed now, like a task had been completed. When we stood to leave, she thanked me for being open. She said it was refreshing. She said she'd hope I continued working through my patterns. Working through, like it was an assignment. Outside, the air felt cooler and thinner. The city noise rushed back in all at once. I stood there for a moment watching people pass, trying to feel solid again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I walked home instead of taking the bus. I needed the movement. My hand felt full in a way that wasn't productive, just loud. Every memory she had pulled out of me felt exposed now, like it didn't belong to me anymore. When I got back to my lid space, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt grounding. I pressed my palms against it and breathed until my heart slowed down. Later that night, I caught myself replaying childhood moments she had labeled unresolved. I noticed how easy it was to start doubting myself when someone spoke with confidence. That scared me. I didn't feel angry at her. I felt used. The next day, she sent a short message wishing me well. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread and blocked the number. Not dramatically, just cleanly. Sometimes now, when someone asks about my past, I feel a flicker of hesitation. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because I remember how quickly openness turned into disqualification. I still believe people are more than patterns. I still believe growth is linear or neat. I just don't believe in handing over pieces of myself to someone who is already holding a red pen. The feeling hit me before I even saw him, like I had walked into the wrong appointment and my name was already on the clipboard. I remember standing outside the building, checking the address again, thinking maybe I had mixed up days. It wasn't nerves. It was that quiet pressure you get when something is already moving and you just stepped into its path. Andrew picked the place. It was a cafe or a bar or anywhere with background noise to hide in. It was a community mediation center that rented out small rooms by the hour. The kind of building people go through for conflict resolution workshops and tenant disputes. Gray walls, low lighting, chairs that were built to be neutral instead of comfortable. Everything about it felt like a pause button. He was already inside when I walked in, sitting at a round table with 2 chairs. No drinks, no bags, just a notebook and a pen placed neatly in front of him. He looked up when he saw me and smiled in a calm, professional way, like he was greeting the client he didn't want to scare. Before we even sat down, he told me something that should have made me leave right away. He said he scheduled dates to practice difficult conversations. He said honesty mattered to him. He said this one might get uncomfortable. He didn't say it like a warning. He said it like a courtesy. I sat down anyway. Part of me wanted to prove I could handle discomfort. Another part of me still thought this was some weird attempt at being deep. I didn't understand yet that I was stepping into a rehearsal. The room was small enough that I could hear the hum of the lights. The walls had sound panels that made everything feel muted, like my voice would fully belong to me once it left my mouth. There was a whiteboard on one wall with faint marker shadows from old sessions. I wondered what had been written there before. Apologies, boundaries, ultimatums. Andrew started by explaining his system. Not in detail, but enough that I could see the shape of it. He believed people avoided hard talks too much. He believed discomfort was a skill you could train. He believed dating was a low-risk environment to practice. That was the moment I realized I was not there for connection. He asked questions that didn't feel curious. They felt designed. Every topic angled toward conflict, values, deal breakers, moments I had disappointed people, moments people had disappointed me. He watched my reactions more than my answers. When I hesitated, he leaned forward slightly, like something useful was happening. He said things to intentionally provoke reactions. Not cruel things, just sharp ones. Statements framed as assumptions. Summaries of my answers that didn't quite match what I meant. Every time my chest tightened or my face warmed, he noticed. He nodded. He wrote something down. He said discomfort meant progress. That word progress floated between us like a goal I had never agreed to work toward. I started feeling like I was being guided somewhere without knowing the destination. Every time I tried to redirect the conversation to something lighter, he brought it back. He said avoidance was also data. He said it was important not to rescue the moment too quickly. My body reacted before my brain did. My shoulders pulled in. My hands folded together on the table. I felt smaller in that chair, like the room was compressing around me. He asked how I handled confrontation. I told him I tried to be honest but gentle. He reframed it as conflict avoidance. He watched my reaction closely when he did it. My stomach dropped, and I hated that he seemed pleased. He said he liked to test how people responded when they felt misunderstood. Test. The word echoed in my head. I realized then that nothing I said could change the structure of the night. I wasn't participating in a date. I was participating in a drill. My reactions were the product. My feelings were the material. The more uncomfortable I got, the more engaged he became. His posture relaxed. His voice stayed even. He said this was the part most people struggled with. He said staying present through discomfort was rare. I wanted to ask him when it ended. When the practice stopped and the date started, I already knew the answer. The room felt colder, even though nothing had changed. The chair pressed into my back in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I noticed the clock on the wall ticking louder than it should have. Time was being measured here. Everything was. At one point, he asked me to describe a time I felt dismissed. I started talking without thinking, and halfway through I realized I didn't want to be this open with someone who was taking notes. My throat tightened. I stopped. He noted that too. He said stopping mid-thought was a defense. He said it showed I was nearing a boundary. He said boundaries were useful to locate. Locate. Like a landmark, not something to respect. I felt heat behind my eyes, not tears exactly, just pressure. I forced myself to breathe slower. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a bigger reaction. The fact that I was even thinking that made me angry with myself. He asked how I was feeling in the moment. Not because he cared, because it was part of the exercise. I said I was uncomfortable. He smiled, just slightly. He said that meant it was working. That was it. That was the moment something in me hardened. I realized I didn't owe him participation. I didn't owe him progress. I didn't owe him anything just because I had shown up. I told him I didn't want to continue. Not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly. He paused, pen hovering over the notebook. For the first time, he looked genuinely surprised. He asked if I wanted to talk through that discomfort instead of leaving. He framed it like an opportunity. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the controlled quiet of the room. The sound felt good, real, messy. He stayed seated, watching me with that same calm focus. He said something about this being an interesting response. He said withdrawal was also part of difficult conversations. I didn't respond. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the room down the hallway, past doors with little signs about mediation sessions and conflict coaching. Every step felt lighter than the last. Outside, the air felt wrong at first, like it always does when you leave somewhere too quiet. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life kept going like nothing weird had just happened. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, grounding myself. I noticed how my hands were shaking slightly. I shoved them into my pockets and took a few deep breaths until the feeling eased. On the way home, I replayed the night in pieces. The notebook, the word progress, the way he leaned in when I looked uncomfortable. It all lined up too neatly. I felt stupid for not leaving earlier, then stopped myself. I didn't do anything wrong. I just noticed late. When I got back to my live place, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the floor. The floor felt solid and forgiving. I stayed there for a while, letting my body catch up to my brain. Later that night, my phone buzzed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew it wouldn't be about how I was feeling. It would be about the process. I blocked his number without hesitation. The next day, I kept noticing how often people softened conversations automatically, how they avoided sharp edges, how kindness wasn't weakness. It was choice. I felt protective of that choice in myself. I still think about that room sometimes, about how easily it could have gone longer, how easy it would have been to stay seated, answering questions, letting myself be used as practice because leaving felt awkward. I don't feel proud or ashamed about it. I just feel clear. I was there for connection. I was there for a rehearsal I never agreed to. And walking out was the only unscripted thing that happened that night. The weird part is I felt picked before I'd even sat down. Not in a confident way. More like when you get called out in class and you know the teacher already decided what you were going to say. I remember standing outside the coffee place, staring at the reflection in the window, thinking I looked normal enough. Jeans, hoodie, nothing loud. I didn't look like anyone important. That's why it caught me off guard later. The cafe was one of those long, narrow ones built out of an old train office. Brick walls, huge windows, mismatched chairs that all wobbled a little. The kind of place people pretend to write in. The smell of burnt espresso clung to everything, even the door handle. I liked it right away. It felt neutral. Safe, like nothing dramatic could happen there. Olivia was already inside, sitting at the long shared table instead of a small one. She had her coffee untouched and her phone face down. She was scrolling. She was just waiting. That alone felt strange. Most people kill time. She looked like time was killing itself for her. I noticed how she watched people come in. Not staring, just clocking them. When I walked over, her attention locked onto me fully, like the rest of the room dropped out. It wasn't flirty, it was focused. We ordered coffee and sat down across from each other. She asked what I did for work early on. I didn't think anything of it. Everyone asks that, I told her. She nodded once like something lined up. That's when she told me her rule. She said she only dated men who reminded her of authority figures. Not as a joke, not as a confession, like a preference you mention the same way someone says they only like dark roast. She smiled while saying it, relaxed and pleased with herself, like she had figured something out and wanted to share. I waited for her to explain further. She did. She talked about patterns, about how attraction wasn't random, about how people gravitate toward roles they understand. She said she didn't waste time pretending otherwise anymore. She said it was cleaner to lean into it. I felt my posture change without meaning to. I sat straighter. I hated that I noticed it. I told her I didn't really see myself that way. I said I wasn't an authority type. I said I didn't like telling people what to do. I said I avoided leadership when I could. It all came out fast, like I was trying to get ahead of something. She smiled wider. She said the disagreement fit her theory. That line hit harder than anything else she said the whole night, not because it was creepy, but because it erased my input. Anything I said just fed the idea. There was no exit from it. Agreeing meant confirmation. Disagreeing meant denial, which also meant confirmation. I felt assigned a role right there, like a name tag pressed onto my chest that I couldn't peel off. The conversation kept going, but it wasn't really a conversation anymore. It felt like she was mapping me. She asked about my family, but not in a curious way. She asked who made decisions growing up. She asked how rules were enforced. She asked how I reacted when people didn't listen to me. Every answer got folded into her calm smile. I tried joking at one point, downplaying myself, making myself sound less solid. She nodded through it like I was proving a point she had already written down somewhere. She explained how she sorted people mentally. Not out loud exactly, but enough that I could tell. Authority was about being loud or strict. It was about presence, about being stable, about not needing permission. She said those people attracted her because they felt familiar. I asked familiar to what? She waved it off lightly, said it was important. It felt important. The cafe started to feel smaller. The long table felt like it stretched forever, trapping us at one end. People came and went, ordering drinks, laughing, working on laptops. Nobody noticed anything wrong. That made it worse. It made me feel like I was the only one stuck in this version of the room. She leaned back in her chair and watched me like she was watching a video on pause. She said something about how men like me always tried to resist labels at first. She said resistance was part of authority, too. She said it showed self-trust. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I wrapped them around my cup even though it was still too hot. My palms started sweating anyway. I asked her what happened if someone didn't fit. She said they usually filtered themselves out. She said that like it was efficient, not sad. I realized then that I wasn't being considered as a person. I was being placed, slotted into a structure that existed before I showed up. She didn't want to know who I was. She wanted to see how well I performed the part she had already picked. I felt myself shrinking, but in a different way than fear. More like flattening, like my edges were being sanded off so I could fit into her outline. I'd pushed back again, harder this time. I told her she was wrong about me. I told her she was projecting. I told her people were more complicated than roles. She listened politely, eyes bright, nodding along. She said my frustration made sense. She said authority figures hated being named. She said it threatened the structure they relied on. I felt my stomach drop. There was no winning, no correction, Every move I made just got translated into her language. It was like arguing with a mirror that changed shape to stay right. The coffee went cold between my hands. I stopped drinking it. She noticed. She said withdrawal was another common response. She said it usually happened right before acceptance or exit. Exit sounded good. I told her I didn't think this was working. I said we probably weren't compatible. I expected resistance, questions, disappointment. She smiled again. She said of course we weren't. She said first dates were about confirming theories, not building anything yet. She said I had been very helpful. Helpful. That word stuck to me like gum on a shoe. She gathered her things calmly, not rushed at all. She thanked me for my time. She said I had confirmed several things for her. She said she wished me luck. I sat there for a moment after she left, staring at the empty chair. It still felt warm, like she might come back and keep going. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weird, but they didn't fully belong to me yet. I threw the rest of the coffee away without tasting it again. Outside, the air felt louder than it should have. Cars, voices, footsteps. Everything crashed back in at once. I walked a few blocks without really knowing where I was going, just trying to feel unobserved again. On the way home, I caught myself straightening my shoulders in shop windows, checking my reflection, wondering what she had seen that I didn't. I hated that part the most. When I got back to my live space, I sat on the floor instead of the couch. The floor felt solid, grounding. I stayed longer than necessary, just breathing, letting the roll drain off me slowly. Later that night, I thought about all the men she had probably met before me. How many had tried to argue their way out? How many had leaned into it? How many never noticed? I blocked her number without hesitation. Not out of anger, just because I didn't want to be useful ever again like that. Sometimes now, when someone makes a comment about me being steady or reliable, I feel a small twist in my chest. Not pride, not fear, just awareness. I don't mind being strong. I just don't want it assigned to me by someone who already decided what I was for. I knew the date was going to be weird the second I saw the envelope. Not in a dramatic movie way. It was just sitting there on the table already, thin and white, tucked neatly beside his phone like it belonged there. I noticed it before I noticed him, which felt backwards somehow. I remember thinking it looked like paperwork, and my brain immediately tried to relax itself by assuming it was nothing important. People bring weird stuff to dates all the time, right? We met at a rooftop greenhouse cafe that sat on top of a parking structure downtown. You had to take 2 elevators and walk through a concrete hallway before suddenly being surrounded by plants and string lights. It smelled like wet soil and citrus. The whole place felt like a secret someone forgot to tell the city about. Dangle stood up when he saw me, polite in a careful way. Not awkward, just measured. He smiled, shook my hand instead of hugging me, and waited until I sat down before sitting himself. That should have been normal. It just didn't feel like it. The envelope stayed between us. I tried to ignore it while we ordered and did the usual first date stuff. How was your day? How was traffic? How did you find this place? All the easy filler. He listened closely. Maybe too closely. His eyes didn't drift. His posture didn't change. He looked like he was bracing for something. After the drinks came, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was a clipboard. I wish I was joking. An actual clipboard, standard brown board, metal clip at the top. He didn't rush it. He slid a single sheet of paper out, smoothed it down, and picked up a pen. The paper was printed, not handwritten. Neat columns, small boxes next to each line. He explained that he liked to be intentional. He said he did believe in wasting time or energy. He said he had learned from past dates that clarity early on saved everyone's stress later. He said this like he was sharing a productivity tip. Then he told me it was a checklist of partner traits. I laughed at first because my brain still thought this had to be a joke. But he didn't react. He just waited. That was the first time I felt that drop in my stomach, like an elevator starting to fall before you realize it's moving. He told me not to worry. He said it once about judgment, just compatibility. He said he would be marking things as we talked, not because I was failing, but because it helped him stay objective. Objective. He placed the clipboard flat on the table, angled so he could see it, but I couldn't read it clearly. I caught a few words upside down. Adaptable. Emotionally steady. Conflict style. Social awareness. Stuff that sounded like it came from a business book. As I talked, he listened and marked. Not constantly. Not aggressively. Just enough that I noticed. A small line through a box here. A pause, and another mark there. Each time, the pen made a soft sound against the paper that felt louder than it should have. I started choosing my words more carefully without meaning to, editing myself mid-sentence, backtracking, explaining things I wouldn't normally explain. I could feel myself shrinking with every mark, like I was trying to fit into the space between his boxes. The cafe felt higher up than before. The glass walls showed the city below, all tiny and distant. I suddenly felt very aware of how exposed the table was. No walls, no corners to tuck into. Just plants and light, and nowhere to hide. He asked questions, but they didn't feel curious. They felt targeted. Every question lined up with another mark. When I talked about my job, he checked something. When I mentioned my family, he checked something else. When I laughed at myself for overthinking, he hesitated, then checked another box. I wondered what happened when something didn't get checked. At one point, he crossed something off instead of checking it. Not a box. The entire line. That one hit harder than the others. It felt final, like a door closing quietly. He didn't react afterward. Didn't apologize. Didn't explain. He just kept going. My body reacted before my brain did. My shoulders pulled in. My voice got softer. I hated that I noticed myself doing it and couldn't stop. It felt like being graded on how well I was pretending to be smaller. I asked him how many items were on the list. He told me there were 32. He said that wasn't too many considering how important compatibility was. He said he used to have more, but he refined it. Refined. I asked how many I had left. He didn't answer that directly. He said progress mattered more than totals. Then he made another mark. The plants around us started to feel fake, like props. The string lights buzzed faintly overhead. The other couples looked normal, leaning in, laughing, sharing plates. I felt like I was in a different version of the same place, one where everything was slightly off. I realized I was waiting for his approval without wanting it. Every time he nodded or made a check instead of a line, my chest loosened a little. That scared me more than the list itself. I started wondering what he did with the sheets afterward, if he kept them. If there was a folder somewhere with names on tabs, if mine would end up there with notes in the margins. He told me he didn't believe people changed much. He said that's why the list mattered. He said first dates show the clearest version of someone before they started performing. I almost laughed at that. Almost. The irony sat heavy between us. I was performing harder than I ever had, and he thought this was the raw version. Halfway through the date, he crossed off another full line. This time I saw the word next to it before he moved his hand. Warmth. Just that. A single word. I felt stupid for how much that hurt. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to hear the explanation. I could already imagine it. Too reserved. Too guarded. Not expressive enough. All things that felt true in that moment, but only because of what he was doing to me. The city lights shifted as the sun went down, reflections stacking in the glass. I felt I was watching myself from outside my body, sitting there nodding, smiling, agreeing, trying to earn checks from someone who had already decided how this worked. When the server came with the check, Daniel glanced at the clipboard one last time. He counted silently. His pen hovered, then he made a final mark. He folded the paper neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it into his bag like the night was complete. He said he appreciated my time. He said I had met more of the criteria than most people. He said it like it was supposed to mean something to me. We rode the elevator down together in silence. The concrete walls closed in around us. The hum of the cables filled the space. I watched the numbers tick down and tried to feel like myself again. Outside, the night air felt sharp and real. He gave a small nod and walked away without looking back. No confusion. No lingering. Just done. I stood there for a minute longer than necessary, grounding myself on the sidewalk, reminding myself that I was not a list, that I didn't need to fit into boxes someone else printed. When I got home, I dropped my bag and sat on the floor of my living room. The quiet felt heavy but safe. I replayed the sound of the pen in my head over and over until it lost its edge. A few days later, I found myself hesitating before speaking in meetings, choosing words like I was still being marked. I hated how quickly it had stuck. I threw away an old notebook that night, just to watch something get discarded on my terms. Daniel never messaged me again. I didn't expect him to. I was already filed somewhere as incomplete. Sometimes I still think about that checklist and wonder how many people have sat across from him feeling themselves disappear one box at a time. I know one thing for sure, though. Nobody gets to hold a clipboard while deciding who I am ever again. The night started with that false calm that makes you think you finally got a normal one. Nothing dramatic, nothing off. Just a dinner, a reservation, a place with real plates instead of paper ones. I remember thinking how nice it felt to not be bracing for anything. I even felt stupid later for how relieved I was walking up to the restaurant like that meant something. The place was tucked between a dry cleaner and a closed pet shop, the kind of restaurant that looks temporary even though it has been there for years. Warm lights, narrow tables, music low enough that you could hear forks scrape. It felt safe. Predictable. That mattered to me more than I wanted to admit. Laura was already there when I arrived, sitting straight, hands folded, looking like she had practiced waiting. Not nervous, not bored. Prepared. She smiled when she saw me, and for a second I relaxed completely. It felt like the night had permission to go well. We ordered food and talked in that early date rhythm that feels like warming up before a run. Work, random opinions, little complaints about daily stuff. Nothing deep yet. Nothing sharp. She was easy to listen to. She made eye contact in a way that felt intentional but not intense. I noticed she barely touched her drink, just nudged it now and then. The hook didn't come as a warning. It slid in casually, wrapped in something that sounded almost playful. She told me she liked to tell different versions of her life story on first dates. She said it helped her understand people better. She said it like it was a hobby, not a red flag. I thought she meant exaggerating details or leaving things out. Everyone does that. I shrugged it off in my head and kept listening. Then she told me the first version. It was neat, clean, full of struggle that wrapped up nicely. Setbacks that turned into motivation. The kind of story that makes you nod along because it hits familiar beats. It sounded real enough that I didn't question it. I even felt impressed. A few minutes later, without any transition, she told another one. Same starting point, different turns, different jobs, different relationships, different reasons for moving cities. This version was messier, more chaotic, less flattering. She framed it like a confession, like she was trusting me with something heavier. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. She just kept going. By the time the food arrived, I had heard 3 versions of her life, all delivered smoothly, all with specific details, all impossible to reconcile with each other. She didn't stumble. She didn't correct herself. She didn't act like she was joking. My fork covered over my plate longer than it should have. My appetite dropped out from under me, but I still ate because stopping felt like drawing attention. Then she asked me which one I liked best. Not which I believed, not which felt real, which one I liked. Something about that phrasing stuck in my throat. It was curiosity. It was selection, like she was offering outfits and waiting to see which fit my taste. I tried to answer carefully. I said I liked parts of all of them. That felt safe. Neutral, it was enough. She pressed. Not aggressively, just persistently. She wanted to know which version I connected with more. She said it helped her decide how to proceed. I remember feeling suddenly very aware of the room, the way other tables leaned into their own conversations, the clink of glasses, the hum of the kitchen. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody was going to step in. I picked one. I don't even remember which. I think it was the second version, the messier one, because it felt more honest even if I wasn't sure it was real. As soon as I said it, she nodded like she had expected that answer. She said that version usually worked better on people like me. That was the moment I wondered who she actually was. The rest of the dinner felt unreal, like I was watching myself from slightly behind my own head. She didn't tell any more stories, but everything she said felt adjustable now, like I was listening to a draft instead of a person. I started noticing patterns. How she paused before answering questions, like she was choosing from options. How she mirrored my reactions a little too perfectly. How she avoided specifics about the present, focusing instead on past versions that could be swapped out. She explained her method without embarrassment. She said she tracked preferences, that different men responded better to different narratives. Some liked resilience, some liked chaos, some liked stability. She said it saved time to figure that out early. I asked her what she preferred. She didn't answer that. She said her preference was alignment. That word stayed with me. The longer we sat there, the more I felt I was shaping her by accident. Every nod, every smile, every pause felt like data. I caught myself reacting less, trying to keep my face neutral. She noticed immediately. She asked if I was overwhelmed. Not concerned. Curious. I realized then that there was no correct response. Liking one version meant rejecting the others. Rejecting all of them meant rejecting her process. Every path led somewhere I didn't want to be. Dessert came without us ordering it. I didn't question it. I barely touched it. She watched me more closely then, like the evaluation stage had moved up a level. She asked if I wanted to hear another version. I didn't. I said yes anyway. This one was darker, heavier, full of loss and sharp turns. She delivered it smoothly, but something about it felt practiced in a different way, like it had been tested and refined. I felt my chest tighten, even though I told myself it wasn't real. When she finished, she waited. I didn't respond fast enough. She said that hesitation usually meant discomfort mixed with interest. She said that was useful to know. I wanted to leave. The urge was sudden and strong, but leaving felt like confirming something I didn't understand yet, so I stayed, even though every part of me wanted out. When the plates were cleared and the check came, she asked one last question. She asked which version I would want to keep seeing. Not which one I thought she was, which one I wanted her to be. That broke something in me. I realized that no answer would lead to a second date I actually wanted. If I chose, I would always wonder what I had selected for. If I refused, I would become another data point labeled incompatible. I gave a vague answer, something about wanting to know the real one. It sounded weak even to me. She smiled politely. Not disappointed. Not pleased. Finished. We walked out together into the night. The street was quiet, the storefronts dark. She stopped at the corner and thanked me for my honesty. I didn't feel honest. I felt hollow. We went our separate ways without awkwardness. No tension. No unfinished business. That somehow made it worse. On the way home, I replayed the stories in my head, trying to find overlaps. Something consistent. A thread that proved a real person underneath. I couldn't find one. When I got home, I sat on my couch longer than usual, staring at nothing. I felt like I had just met several people and none of them stayed. She didn't message me after. I didn't message her. The silence felt mutual and final. Sometimes I still think about how easily she switched between lives, how smooth it was, how normal she made it sound. I wonder how many versions of her are out there, walking into restaurants, adjusting based on reactions, collecting preferences. I don't know which one was real. I don't know if any of them were. All I know is that I walked away feeling like I had almost picked something that would have slowly replaced me too. I knew something was off before I'd even finished getting ready, like my body picked it up before my brain did. It wasn't nerves. It was that quiet resistance you feel when you keep checking the time even though you are not late. I almost canceled, not for a reason I could explain, just because everything about the night felt slightly tilted. But I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking again and grabbed my jacket. Michael picked the place. Not a bar, not a cafe, not anywhere loud. It was an old interactive science museum that stayed open late once a week for adults. He said it would be fun and different. That word should have been my warning, but it wasn't. I like different. I still do, just not like that. The building sat near a river, concrete and glass, glowing too brightly against the dark. Inside, everything smelled like sanitizer and old plastic. Exhibits blinked and hummed, half broken, half working. Kids weren't allowed during the night hours, so it was mostly couples wandering around touching buttons and pretending to learn things. Michael was already there when I walked in. He stood near a display about human reflexes, hands behind his back, calm in a way that felt practiced. He didn't rush toward me. He waited until I noticed him. I didn't think much of it then. The night started normal enough. Walking, looking at things, making small comments in my head about how weird some of the exhibits were. I noticed pretty quickly that Michael didn't react much. Not to jokes, not to awkward moments, not to anything really. He watched. Not staring, just tracking, like I was a screen and something was loading. It came out slowly, not as a confession, but as a fact. He admitted that he chose dates based on how likely they were to react. He said he didn't want predictable people. He wanted range. He said that reactions showed truth faster than words ever could. I laughed at first because I didn't know what else to do. It sounded like a bad attempt at being deep, but then he started pointing things out. He noted when I paused before touching an exhibit that involved electricity. He noted when I stepped back slightly during a loud sound demonstration. He noted when I crossed my arms while he talked about past dates. Every note came calmly, like he was collecting stamps. The worst part was how neutral his tone stayed. There was no judgment, no excitement, just documentation. We moved into a darker section of the museum where the lights were low and the floor sloped slightly. The exhibits there focused on fear responses. Heart rate monitors, mirrors that distorted faces, rooms that messed with balance. I didn't love it, but I told myself it was just a setting, just lights and sounds. Michael loved it. Every time my body reacted before my brain could catch up, he noticed. When my steps slowed, when my shoulders tightened, when I laughed too fast to cover discomfort. He mentioned each one like a milestone. He said those moments mattered more than conversation. I started feeling that the walls were closer than before. Not physically, just in the way you feel when there are no exits nearby, even if there are signs pointing to them. I tried steering us back toward lighter exhibits, but he redirected gently every time, like it was accidental. At one point, we stood in front of a screen that showed delayed video of whoever stood there. You would move and see yourself a few seconds later. It messed with your sense of timing. I watched my own movements lag and felt dizzy. Michael watched my face instead of the screen. He calmly noted when I looked uncomfortable, like it was progress. That sentence stuck in my head, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. He didn't say it to scare me. He said it like someone checking off a box. Discomfort was a problem to solve. It was a goal. I asked myself why I didn't leave right then. The answer wasn't bravery or politeness. It was confusion. I kept thinking I must be misunderstanding something. That context would fix it. That if I stayed a little longer, it would click into something normal. It didn't. We sat for a bit on a bench near a display of eye tracking. The bench was cold and smooth, designed for short breaks, not comfort. Michael leaned back, relaxed. I felt like I was sitting in a waiting room. He explained that he had been doing this for years, not just dates, interviews, friendships. He said people revealed themselves fastest when they didn't know they were being tested. He said most people failed without realizing it. I didn't ask what failure meant. I became hyper-aware of my body. Every movement felt loud. Every expression felt exposed. I tried to keep my face neutral, but that just made me tense. I could feel them noticing the effort. We walked again, past a display with optical illusions that made the floor look uneven. I hesitated before stepping on it, my foot hovering for half a second. He noticed. Of course he did. He said that hesitation showed caution mixed with curiosity. He said it like it was a compliment. It didn't feel like one. The museum felt endless. Corridors looped back into each other. Signs pointed toward exits that didn't seem to get closer. The river outside was invisible through the tinted glass, but I could hear it faintly like static. I realized then that I felt like a test subject. Not in a dramatic, trapped way. More like I had agreed to be part of something without signing anything. Like my presence itself was consent. I thought about all the little choices I had made leading up to this. The jacket, the bus, the door. Michael never touched me, never raised his voice, never blocked my path. That somehow made it worse. There was nothing obvious to react against. Just this steady observation that made me feel smaller by the minute. We ended up in a room designed to disorient sound. Speakers played tones that shifted direction constantly. I couldn't tell where anything was coming from. My head started to ache. I rubbed my temples without thinking. He noted that too. He said sensory overload was a useful threshold. He said people showed their real limits there. He said I was approaching mine, but had not crossed it yet. That was it. I didn't announce I was leaving. I didn't explain. I just turned and walked toward the nearest exit sign. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water, but I didn't stop. I half expected him to follow, to say something, to react. He did. I reached the doors and pushed them open into the night. The air outside felt wrong at first, too open, like stepping off a boat. I stood there for a second, breathing too fast, listening to the river and the distant sound of traffic. Michael didn't come out. On the ride home, my phone stayed silent. No messages, no follow-up. It was like once the observation ended, I stopped existing. When I got home, I sat on the floor of my living room instead of the couch. The floor felt solid, real. I stayed longer than I meant to, just grounding myself in the fact that nobody was watching. A few days later, I noticed something small but unsettling. I had started monitoring myself, catching reactions before they happened, correcting expressions mid-motion. I hated that I had picked it up so fast. I blocked Michael without hesitation when his profile popped back up in my suggested contacts. I didn't feel dramatic about it, just done. Sometimes I still think about that museum. How many people wandered through it thinking it was just a quirky date spot? How many of them left feeling measured in ways they couldn't name? I don't go places that call themselves interactive anymore. I don't need to be part of anyone else's study. The first thing that hooked me was how normal it all sounded at the start. Emily didn't pitch anything strange. She didn't hype it up. She just suggested we meet somewhere quiet where we could actually focus. That alone felt refreshing. I had been on enough first dates that turned into background noise competitions. This felt like it might be different in a good way. We met at the community art space that doubled as a cafe during the evenings. It used to be a library a long time ago, so everything echoed just a little too much. High ceilings, long tables, lamps that made everyone look pale. There were flyers taped everywhere for classes that never seemed to start. It felt temporary, like nobody was meant to stay long. I noticed right away that Emily didn't seem nervous at all. Not stiff, not overly confident either, just steady, like she had already been there for an hour getting ready for me. She watched how I walked in, how I scanned the room, how long it took me to notice her. It was obvious, but it wasn't hidden either. The hook came fast. Within minutes, she asked me to rate her honesty in real time. Not in a playful way. Not like one of those dumb icebreaker games. She framed it like a task. She said she liked transparency and didn't want misunderstandings later. She explained that she worked on herself constantly and wanted outside feedback to keep things accurate. It sounded intense, but I figured some people just talk like that. I didn't think much before answering. I gave a number that felt polite and safe. Not perfect, not insulting. The kind of number you give when you barely know someone and don't want to mess things up. She corrected me immediately. Not angrily, not emotionally. She corrected me the way someone corrects a math problem. She explained that based on her self-tracking, her journaling, and feedback from others, her honesty rating was higher. She adjusted my number upward and asked me to remember that for later reference. I laughed a little, thinking it was a joke that didn't land. She did laugh back. From that moment on, everything shifted without officially changing. The date continued, but now there was a structure I had agreed to. Every topic had an invisible checklist. Whenever she talked about herself, she paused afterward and looked at me expectantly. I realized she wanted another rating. Honesty, clarity, self-awareness, sometimes all three. When I hesitated or gave an answer that didn't line up with what she thought of herself, she corrected me again. Calmly. Thoroughly. She cited patterns from her past relationships, comments from coworkers, even notes she had written about herself months earlier. It wasn't bragging. It was documentation. I started feeling like I was being read in return instead of listened to. The space around us felt quieter the longer it went on. Other people came and went, chairs scraping, cups clinking, but our table felt sealed off. Like the air was thicker there. I noticed she had a notebook open beside her drink. She never wrote in it while I watched, but she turned pages occasionally, like she was checking progress. I tried shifting the conversation toward lighter stuff. Movies, random hobbies, childhood memories. It didn't matter. Everything came back to evaluation. Even when I talked about myself, she rated my answers. Not out loud, but I could see it in her face. Little adjustments. Mental notes. Sometimes she would nod satisfied. Sometimes her mouth tightened slightly, like something had gone wrong. I realized I was being calibrated. The worst part was how reasonable it all sounded on the surface. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't dramatic. She never raised her voice. She framed everything as improvement, alignment, accuracy. Disagreement wasn't framed as a difference in opinion. It was framed as an error. I tested it once without fully meaning to. She described herself as someone who never avoids hard truths. I thought about how she had dodged a question earlier about a falling out with a friend. I gently lowered my rating by 1 point, just one. The temperature dropped instantly. She didn't get mad. She didn't argue. She explained that my perception was flawed because I lacked full context. She said avoidance and privacy were different things, and that my inability to see that showed I wasn't listening properly. She asked me to reconsider my rating with that correction in mind. I felt pressure behind my eyes like I was about to mess up a test I didn't study for. I changed the number back. She smiled then, not warm, satisfied. That's when it clicked that disagreement was allowed. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was failure. From there on, the night felt longer than it should have. Time stretched weirdly in that place. The lamps buzzed faintly. The walls seemed too tall. I noticed cameras in the corners that I assumed were for security, but suddenly I wasn't so sure. Emily never looked at them, but she positioned herself so I was always facing one. She talked about future planning in vague terms, compatibility metrics, growth timelines. She mentioned that first dates were useful because people revealed resistance early. She said resistance saved time. I started agreeing automatically, nodding, adjusting myself mid-thought to match what I thought she wanted. It wasn't conscious at first. It was survival. The faster I aligned, the smoother things went, the more relaxed she seemed. I hated how easy it was. At one point, she asked me to rate how safe she felt to me. That one stuck. I paused too long. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't name. I gave a high number anyway. My chest felt tight afterward, like I had lied out of instinct. She accepted it, but reminded me that safety was about trust in her self-assessment. She said true safety meant believing her version over my discomfort. She said that part like it was obvious. I looked around the room then and noticed something else. The flyers on the walls were all about self-optimization, productivity groups, accountability circles, honesty workshops. This wasn't just a cafe. It was a system, a place where people came to be measured and adjusted. I wondered how many people had sat at that same table thinking they were just on a date. When the evening finally wound down, it didn't end naturally. She checked the time and said we had gathered enough data for our first meeting. She asked me how I thought it went. I gave a careful answer, neutral but positive. She nodded and said my self-reporting was improving. That scared me more than anything else. Outside, the air felt flat and unreal, like stepping out of a long tunnel. My phone buzzed with a follow-up message before I even reached my car. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew it would include ratings, summaries, next steps. I drove home on autopilot, replaying moments I should have pushed back harder, moments I should have left. But every memory ended the same way, with her calm correction smoothing over my instincts. When I got home, I sat on my bed and stared at my hands. I felt adjusted, sanded down, like parts of me had been quietly marked as inefficient. I blocked her that night without responding. The relief was immediate but thin, like ice over water. A week later, I got an email from the art space advertising a new group session on radical honesty metrics. I didn't open it. I deleted it and cleared my trash. Sometimes I still catch myself reading my own thoughts before I let them finish. I notice when I agree too fast. I notice when disagreement feels dangerous. I don't think about Emily much anymore, but every now and then when someone asks me what I think and waits a little too closely for the answer, my stomach tightens like I'm back at that table, trying not to fail. I didn't think much of it when Michael pushed for his favorite bar. First dates always come with weird preferences. People cling to places like they matter more than the person they bring. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was casual. I told myself a lot of things on the bus ride there while staring at my phone and pretending not to be nervous. The place sat under a closed-down bowling alley, like it had been hiding there for years. Neon signs half-lit sticky sidewalk, the kind of door that looked heavier than it needed to be. Before I even went in, I felt like I was late for something I never agreed to show up for. That feeling hit first, before anything else did. The second thing that hit was my name. I stepped inside, and it was loud but not fun loud. More like everyone already knew how the night was supposed to go. I barely made it 3 steps before the bartender looked straight at me and smiled like I was expected. Someone near the pool table leaned over and stared too long. Another person nodded at me like we shared history. My name floated around the room in pieces, like it had been dropped there earlier and never cleaned up. I froze for half a second, trying to figure out if I had been here before and forgot. I had. I would have remembered this place. The air smelled like old citrus cleaner and spilled beer that never really dries. The lights were dim in that tired way, not moody, just worn down. The walls were packed with photos of regulars, some framed, some taped, all crooked. I wasn't in any of them, but I felt like I should have been. Michael wasn't hard to spot. He stood near the back like he owned the space without trying. He looked calm, settled, like this was a date but a shift he had already clocked into. When he noticed me, he smiled in a way that felt rehearsed, like he knew exactly how it looked from across the room. What got me was how nobody asked who I was. Nobody checked. Nobody hesitated. It was like my arrival completed something. A few people went quiet when I passed, then slowly got louder again once I was fully inside, like the door closing sealed the moment. I felt watched without anyone staring directly at me for too long. It was threatening at first, just strange. Like I had walked onto the wrong floor of a building and everyone assumed I belonged there. I kept telling myself it was flattering in a messed up way. Michael had talked about me. Maybe too much. Maybe he was just like that. Oversharing, enthusiastic, awkward. That explanation lasted about 5 minutes. I ordered a drink and didn't even have to say what I wanted. The bartender slid it over with a grin that felt a little too proud, like they had done well on a test. I didn't touch it right away. I watched the surface of it settle, the ice shifting slowly, like time was thick in that glass. As the night moved on, things started lining up in ways that didn't feel random. People drifted over, one at a time, never in a rush. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't ask me questions like normal strangers. They observed. They listened. They reacted to me like I was already mid-conversation. Someone laughed when I laughed, a beat too late. Someone frowned when I checked my phone, like I had broken a rule. Michael stayed close but not attentive. He watched how I interacted with the room more than he watched me. His eyes flicked between faces, checking reactions, tracking something invisible. Every now and then he nodded to himself, like a note had been taken. I noticed the notebook after my second drink. It was hidden. That was the weird part. It sat on the bar near where Michael had been standing earlier. Black cover, corners worn, pages bent. Someone flipped it closed when they noticed me looking, and slid it a little farther away, not fast, just deliberate, like it went secret, just not for me yet. The walls started to feel closer the longer I stayed. Not literally, but in that way where you can't find a spot to stand that doesn't feel claimed. Even the bathroom had a sign with a joke that didn't make sense unless you had a context. I didn't. I wasn't supposed to. At some point, I realized nobody was drinking much. People held glasses, sure, but they barely sipped. They were alert, focused. I felt like the only one getting fuzzy, but the room was clear, and I was the blurry part. The moment it really clicked was when someone I had never seen before congratulated Michael. Not out loud, not in a way that made a scene, just a quick pat on the shoulder and a satisfied look. Michael reacted like it was normal, like it happened all the time. My stomach dropped in that slow, heavy way. Not panic, more like realization. This was a date. Not really. This was a test run, a trial version of me. I started replaying things Michael had asked me before we met, little questions that felt harmless at the time. How I handled stress, whether I liked small towns, if I got along with strangers easily, if I ever felt like I wanted to belong somewhere badly enough to ignore red flags. I had laughed at that one. I did laugh now. I noticed a board near the back of the bar, half hidden behind a dart setup. It had names on it. Not chalkboard cute, more like permanent marker, crossed out and rewritten. Some names had stars next to them. Some had notes I couldn't read from where I stood. I scanned it without meaning to, then saw the empty space at the bottom. My spot. Everything made sense in a sick, simple way. Michael didn't bring dates here. He brought candidates. People he thought might fit. People he had talked up, polished, presented. The bar was his favorite place to drink. It was his filter. I wondered how many first dates had walked through that door thinking they were special. I wondered how many had noticed too late. I wondered what happened when someone failed. I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I didn't announce anything. I didn't cause a scene. I just started moving toward the door like I was going to the bathroom again. Nobody stopped me, but I felt the shift immediately. Eyes followed, shoulders straightened. The room adjusted like I had changed the temperature. Right before I reached the door, Michael looked at me with something close to confusion. Not anger, not fear. More like disappointment mixed with surprise, like a project that wasn't turning out the way he planned. I did look back once I stepped outside. The night air felt fake after that place, like a set piece. The street was quiet in a boring, normal way that almost felt wrong. I stood there for a second, grounding myself on the cracked sidewalk, listening to a car pass somewhere far away. Nobody followed me out. Nobody called my name. On the ride home, my phone buzzed once. I didn't open it. I already knew it would be something light, something casual, something that pretended the night was normal. I read the screen without unlocking it and slid the phone back into my pocket. I didn't lock Michael right away. I waited until I got home, until I sat on my bed and stared at my wall like it might move. Then I blocked him, deleted the messages, and tried to convince myself it was over. Sometimes I still think about that empty space on the board. Sometimes I wonder if my name ever made it up there anyway. Sometimes I imagine someone else walking into that bar weeks later, feeling flattered, feeling seen, not knowing they were already being measured. I don't go on first dates at bars anymore. Not because of fear, just because I know better than to walk into rooms that already decided who I am.